Chapter 101, Era. The female apprentice frowned and reprimanded, "Grice, you pig, don't only know how to eat. Quickly tell us the information we need." The fatty said, "Roxanne, if you call me a pig again, I will eat you." The female apprentice was furious and immediately raised her hands. Large patches of green air currents surged out from the mouth in her palms and swept towards the fatty. The fatty's expression changed and he hurriedly leaped backward to avoid it. The poisonous gas brushed past the corner of the fatty's clothes and quickly wrapped around the corpse on the ground. For a moment, one could only hear puchy-puchy sounds as the corpse began to corrode at a speed visible to the naked eye. As if it was placed in sulfuric acid that was a million times stronger, large patches of white smoke rose from the corpse's body. The clothes instantly melted, followed by scarlet flesh. The flesh festered, followed by the white bones below. In just a few breaths' time, the body had already disappeared, leaving behind a brown acid water that was emitting white smoke. The fatty's face turned red. "Roxanne, I'm going to bite you into pieces, you damn!" He roared angrily, and white smoke that seemed to have substance shot out of his nostrils. The veins on his forehead bulged, and his entire body expanded at a speed visible to the naked eye. He broke through the clothes and instantly became a giant that was several meters tall. The muscles all over his body bulged, making him look exceptionally terrifying. "Enough, both of you!" Right at this moment, the remaining bald man spoke coldly. Just as he spoke, a crack appeared on his head, and a finger drilled out from within. The tip of the finger was a small mouth, and when the mouth opened, a ball of black gas gushed out, forming a ferocious ghost face on top of his head. Seeing that ghost face, the fatty's expression was obviously somewhat fearful. The bald man said, "Don't waste your energy on such a messy matter. Don't forget why we're here." The fatty said angrily, "It was that Roxanne who provoked me first." Roxanne snorted lightly and turned her head away. The bald man said, "All right, Grice, tell us what you know. What did you get from the corpse?" Grice smacked his lips and said, 16 apprentices fought here. Other than these 5, there were 3 labyrinth-flavored ones, 4 blood castle-flavored ones, 3 crescent bay-flavored ones, and 1 shadow tower-flavored one. The battle happened 3 days ago." Shadow Tower. The bald man's eyes lit up. Could it be an official apprentice? Grice shook his head. He should be a pauper, and he came later. He didn't participate in the battle. He just passed by here. For some unknown reason, he touched these corpses separately. There was very little smell left, so we can't know too many clues. Roxanne said, "The paupers of Shadow Tower are also extremely rich." The bald man did not comment. "That is, if they were not robbed." He then asked, "Where did they go?" Grice's nose twitched, and then he said, "The Labyrinth, Red Castle and Crescent Bay went east." It should be the Red Castle and Crescent Bay chasing Labyrinth. The Shadow Tower also went west, but he went to the Forest of Souls. The bald man said, "There's no need to waste energy on him. It is not worth giving up the entire forest for a boar." He looked at the distant forest. The terrifying mouth that was exposed was pulled to both sides, forming a terrifying smile. He said excitedly, "The best era has arrived. Cheers, Black Demon King. Let us enjoy the fun of hunting to our heart's content." Wizard World, New Calendar, Year 1270, Late Autumn. On the 10th day after the defeat of Shadow Tower, Evernight Wetland, which had a grudge against the Labyrinth Academy, launched a sneak attack on the Labyrinth Academy's encampment. Countless resources were plundered, causing the Labyrinth Academy to suffer heavy losses. On the same day, the Master of Labyrinth Academy, Patrick, who was in the Dark Council in the place of resolution, was besieged by Red Castle and Crescent Bay because he refused to hand over the ruler's scepter. Patrick fled in a panic with his daughter, Mina, and all the apprentices accompanying him were annihilated. The next day, Ivory Tower declared war on Crossbatch, saying that Crossbatch had occupied the Shadow Tower's support and taken away Whitestone Sacred Mountain, their resource area. On the same day, the Ivory Tower was attacked by the Thorn Forest. Because the Master and a group of apprentices went to attack Crossbatch, the Wizard Tower's defense was empty, and they suffered heavy losses. On the same day, Thorn Forest was attacked by Blood Ring Spire, and they suffered heavy losses. On the same day, the Blood Ring Spire was attacked by Dust Forest. Similar incidents happened everywhere. Almost every day, one could hear the news that a wizard organization was at war with another wizard organization, and after the two sides fought, they would often be ambushed by other wizard organizations. The ambushers who snatched the resources did not have time to be happy, but their own nest was wiped out by others. Sneak attacks, group fights, robberies, beating up the weak with numbers, and using guns to bully the weak, these big taboos that had been severely broken in the past had now become very common. Everyone no longer followed the previous rules, and the world had completely returned to the most primitive laws. The law of the jungle. A few days later, east of the gloomy sea of trees, in the Forest of Souls. After a few days of traveling, Heath had successfully arrived at the Forest of Souls. At this moment, somewhere in the Forest of Souls. Yay! Yay! A dry screech sounded. A black crow flapped its wings and flew over from afar. It circled and landed on the withered tree trunk. It tilted its neck and turned its scarlet eyes to look at the empty space in front of it. There was a corpse lying on the empty space in front of it. It was the corpse of a female apprentice. The decorative patterns on her cloak had been burned and could not be identified. Half of her body had a hole in it, and there was an icicle on her head. Blood was gushing out, dyeing the grass on the ground red. She opened her eyes wide and stared at the grey sky with empty eyes. The crow observed for a while, then flapped its wings and flew down, spreading its sharp beak to peck at the female apprentice's eyes. There was no fear at all toward the top of the food chain. Crash! At this moment, a soft sound came from behind. The bushes shook, and a figure walked into the open space. Heath walked forward and hurriedly waved his hand to drive the crow away. Yay! Yay! The frightened crow threw away the delicious food in front of it, flapped its wings, and flew away. After driving the crow away, Heath immediately walked towards the corpse. At this moment, he no longer had the emotional expression he had a few days ago. When he saw the corpse, there was not even the slightest change in his expression. It was as if he was looking at an ordinary object. After he arrived in front of the corpse, he easily bent his knees and skillfully placed his hand on the corpse's chest. It was as if he was dealing with a very routine task. He silently chanted in his heart, "Extract." Beep, extraction successful. Spiritual power plus 0.03. Beep, extraction successful. Obtain spell knowledge introduction to fire elements guide. Beep, extraction successful. Half-life soul energy plus 28. Chapter 102, Scream. Sensing the soul energy surging into his body, Heath closed his eyes and entered his sea of consciousness. At this moment, the half-life soul in his sea of consciousness had grown to the size of a fist. Densely packed light spots gathered in it, making it particularly dazzling in the pitch-black sea of consciousness. If Daniel saw such a large-scale half-life soul, he would definitely be shocked. One had to know that Daniel had spent more than half a year to cultivate a half-life soul to such a scale. He had even used up a weeping soul flower that was worth tens of thousands of magic stones. It had been less than a month since Heath had left the tower with the spell. The best material he had eaten was only a ghost mushroom that was worth hundreds of magic stones. Opening his eyes, Heath grinned and said sincerely, "Thank you for the gift from nature." The reason why his half-life soul body could improve so quickly was naturally because of the loot. Over the past 10 days, Heath had encountered 2 more rounds of corpses left behind by the apprentices after the fight. One was 5 corpses, and the other was 3 corpses, which brought him hundreds of soul energy. One of them was probably a high-level apprentice, and he had provided 86 soul energy in one go, which was much longer than the other apprentices combined. The only problem was that some of them were broken so badly that he couldn't extract anything. Otherwise, Heath would have been able to grow even more. Be content. It's already good enough to have some. Shaking his head, Heath put away the regret in his heart. Then, after finishing the extraction, he lowered his head to observe the female apprentice on the ground. The corpse was still warm and should have died not too long ago. The fatal injury was on the head. The icicle had pierced through the skull and damaged the brain. Most of the corpse was still well preserved. This was also the main reason why Heath was able to obtain 28 points of soul energy. The magic stone pocket wasn't taken away? The wizard tool is also here. As he was observing, he suddenly discovered that the female apprentice's magic stone pocket and wizard tool were still in good condition and had not been taken away. Although he had picked up the corpses a few times over the past few days, every time, the corpses were plundered clean. They even wished that their clothes were stripped away. This was the first time he had picked up a magic stone pocket like this. Heath picked up the magic stone pocket and reached into it with his spiritual tentacle, trying to erase the other party's spiritual imprint. After advancing to an advanced apprentice, his spiritual power had already increased significantly. This female apprentice was only a low-level apprentice. The spiritual imprint left behind was very limited, so he easily erased it. The spiritual tentacle reached into it. Heath scanned around. There were not many things. There were only a few hundred magic stones and some random materials, but it was still an unexpected harvest. I wonder which organization she is from. Heath looked at the female apprentice's cloak. Unfortunately, it had been burnt down and could not be recognized, so he could only give up. The most up-to-date novels are published on Fruitnoelo. Following that, he stood up and casually grabbed upwards. A ball of flame was caught in his hand, and then he sent it towards the female apprentice's body. With a series of sizzling sounds, the flame engulfed the female apprentice's entire body. The other party gave both attributes and magic stones, so it was not too much of a stretch to just casually collect a corpse for others, right? Not to mention the large number, this 1 or 2 corpses did not cost much magic power, right? Under the flickering light of the flame, Heath walked into the forest of souls in front of him to search for soul materials. The additional benefits brought by looting the corpse were just luck that Heath saw as God's gift. Putting aside this part of luck, he would train and work as hard as he could. The forest of souls itself was mainly made up of soul materials. After searching for a while, suddenly, a cry that sounded like that of a baby came from ahead. "Wawa! Wawa!" Heath followed the sound and walked over. He saw that the sound came from an empty space in front of him. There was a lone tree. On the tree, there were many fruits that looked like jellied fruits. If one were to observe carefully, one would discover that each jellied fruit had facial features that looked like a human. Heath's eyes lit up. This was a shrieking fruit, also known as a doll fruit. This kind of plant that looked like Japanese melon but had the same facial features as a human was a common spiritual material in the wizard world. They usually grew in the forest around human towns. They would emit cries that sounded like children's cries, luring hunters into the forest or travelers passing by. When the deceived humans came under the trees, they would let out ear-piercing screams. Their screams had an extremely strong soul attack power. They could instantly shatter a human's soul, turn into a body, and fall down, rotting into nutrients for the shrieking fruits. Heath walked forward. When he was about 5 meters away from the fruits suddenly opened their mouths and let out ear-piercing screams at him. Ah! At this moment, the value of a half-life soul was displayed. The scream of the fruit was not to be underestimated. Usually, apprentices needed to wear special equipment when they were collecting the fruit. Even so, there were still cases of apprentices fainting from collecting the fruit. However, facing the piercing scream, Heath only felt that it was a little noisy. The most terrifying part of the scream, the soul attack, had already been blocked by the half-life soul form. The remaining screams naturally did not have much power. Picking a scream fruit, Heath took it in his hand. Extract. Beep, extraction successful. Soul energy +2. Only a little bit increased? It had to be said that after experiencing the dozens of points of soul energy increase from the bodies of the apprentices, this little bit of bonus from the shrieking fruit was really not pleasant. Heath then picked a few more to extract. After extracting twice in a row, the shrieking fruit could no longer extract soul energy. It seems that this rule of species restriction still has a restriction on soul energy. But speaking of which, the only thing that doesn't have a restriction is the corpses of humans and wizards. No matter how many times you extract it, you can always extract the attributes. Is it because everyone is different individually? Or is it because there are restrictions on humans, but the amount extracted is not enough? While he was making wild guesses, Heath picked the shrieking fruit one by one and put it into his dimensional pocket. The shrieking fruit was a common spirit-type material. Normally, one would cost more than 10 magic stones. In the future, it would probably be even more expensive. After all, the price of goods would skyrocket every time there was a war. Now that he had the chance to take it for free, of course, he would take as much as he could. Very soon, a shrieking fruit tree was completely uprooted by him. The 2 sacks were filled to the brim with shrieking fruits. Tying the rope, Heath casually threw the sacks into the spatial pocket and continued walking into the forest. Along the way, all the materials he saw were all put into his pocket. Shrieking fruit, weeping flower, soul spark, blue-tailed grass. The Forest of Souls was one of the important cultivation areas of Shadow Tower. The resources inside were even more abundant than those of small wizard organizations. In order to prevent outsiders from stealing, Shadow Tower even placed several advanced apprentices here to guard it all year round. However, with the defeat of Shadow Tower, the Forest Keeper was called back early. He could naturally do whatever he wanted in the empty Forest of Souls. In fact, if it was a normal change of power, the wizard organization that took over the Forest of Souls would quickly send apprentices to garrison here. However, based on the current chaotic situation, no one would be able to take care of this place for a while. Even if the wizard organization that took over this place in the future discovered that the Forest of Souls had been stolen from, it did not matter. As long as he did not take the initiative to go over and give it to them for free, there was basically no possibility of being caught. In the entire Underdark Trezia, the wizard organization that had the ability to capture fugitives in the entire area could only be the Shadow Tower from before. Following that, Heath stayed in the Forest of Souls to gather materials. Just as he arrived near a small forest, there was suddenly a sound of conflict from the forest. Scorching Valley. Mithril Fortress. Don't go too far. We agreed that the Forest of Souls should belong to our Dusk Mill, and because of that, our wizard master almost lost his life. Are you going to break the contract? Agreement? Our Scorching Valley didn't have an agreement with you Dusk Mills. Dusk Mill, this is the entire Forest of Souls. If your organization wants to take it all, can you eat so much? Aren't you afraid of bursting your stomach? Cut the crap. The past is the past, and now is the present. Agreements and rules are bullshit. The wizard world only cares about strength. Chapter 103, Pick Up. People? Heath immediately perked up and recited a short syllable at the same time. As soon as he finished, his figure disappeared into the forest, along with his spiritual power, elemental reactions, and even his own smell. This was naturally the Veraz's invisibility manual that he had obtained from the Labyrinth Academy's apprentice. Heath had actually heard of this spell when he was in Shadow Tower. It was a relatively high-end invisibility spell that had been modified using invisibility as the blueprint. Its creator was called Veraz, and he was a relatively famous wizard in the Old Earth continent for invisibility spells. He had strengthened the spiritual power and elemental fluctuations of invisibility spells in all aspects, allowing this apprentice-level invisibility spell to be no less effective than a wizard's invisibility spell. After entering the invisibility state, unless one was an official wizard or above, as long as an apprentice did not use spells or magic to release spiritual power, they would not be noticed. After entering the invisibility state, Heath immediately went forward. Relying on his night-level strength, he arrived at the place where the sound of a dispute could be heard. Standing on a tree trunk, Heath looked down. There was an empty space below. At this time, there were already more than 20 apprentices standing on the empty space. They were from the Scorching Valley, Mithril Fortress, and Dusk Mill. Both sides were having an argument. Heath listened for a while. It was basically like this. Before the attack on Shadow Tower, the Allied forces had made a verbal agreement that the Forest of Souls would belong to Dusk Mill after the war. But this time, only a portion of the wizard organizations had participated in the attack on Shadow Tower. There were many wizard organizations in the Underdark Trezia that had not participated in this operation. However, not participating did not mean that these wizard organizations would sit back and watch the allied wizard organizations split the cake, right? They did not have the guts to attack Shadow Tower, but they still had the prestige to bully the weaker wizard organizations. Therefore, after the war ended, Dusk Mill sent people to take over the Forest of Souls as promised. As soon as their apprentices entered the Forest of Souls, they stopped fighting in the nearby Scorching Valley and Mithril Fortress. They immediately sent people to fight for the sovereignty of the Forest of Souls. They had been arguing here for a long time, and even had a fight not long ago. The dead female apprentice that Heath met before entering the forest was a member of Dusk Mill. You bunch of scum who don't follow the rules will pay for this. If you have the ability, then come. After a round of arguing, the red-eyed Dusk Mill apprentice roared and took the lead to throw a fireball at the other side. The battle once again drew to a close. Heath observed for a while and left a spiritual mark on the tree trunk next to him before retreating. The strength of the three parties was only low or medium. The damage of the apprentices at this stage was very limited, and it would take a while for the outcome to be determined. Leaving a spiritual mark for positioning would be enough for him to come back later to loot the corpses. There was no need for him to stay here. After leaving here, Heath returned to the forest to continue his collection work. After about half an hour, he estimated that it was about time, and then he turned back along the spiritual mark. When he arrived at the empty space, there were already 3 corpses on the messy empty space. Heath walked up and extracted them. Beep, extraction successful. Spiritual power plus 0.03. Beep, extraction successful. Soul energy plus 26. Beep, extraction successful. After extracting the attributes, Heath took the magic stone pockets and wizard tools from the 3 people. Just like the female apprentice before, the magic stone pockets and wizard tools on the corpses had not been cleaned in time. After that, Heath looked around the scene and could not help but raise his eyebrows. Is this the end of the fight? There were more than 20 apprentices just now, but now there were only 2 or 3 corpses here. Where did the rest of the people go? After observing the center of the open space, he followed the traces on the ground and headed forward. After walking for about a kilometer, he found the previous batch of apprentices again. The war was still going on, but the location of this battle had been shifted to this place. Dusk Mill, I'm giving you a chance now. Leave this place obediently. We'll stop here. It's not good for anyone to continue fighting. Humph, what a joke. Who do you think you are? Third-rate trash who can't even bring out an official wizard wants to go against our Dusk Mill. Then let's go. Let's see who can last till the end. Seeing that both sides were still in a heated battle, Heath did not want to disturb them. After leaving a mark, he returned to the forest to collect materials. After another few minutes, he returned. Similar to the situation in the open space, there were 3 to 5 more corpses on the open space. Heath followed suit and went up to extract the attributes and loot the magic stone pockets. Similarly, the war was not over yet. After that, Heath continued to follow the traces of the war into the forest. Soon, he found the apprentices who were still fighting. Mithril Fortress. Scorching Valley. None of you can leave this place alive today. I will skin you alive and copy the incantation. The only one who will die here today will be your Dusk Mill. I will use your bones to make a magic wand. If it's a woman, I will use her womb to breed dog embryos. Both parties were bloodthirsty. Their furious roars echoed throughout the entire forest. Heath left his mark and turned to leave. After that, Heath repeated the process. He left his mark and went to the forest to collect materials. He estimated that it was about time, and then he returned to pick up the bodies. He left his mark and went back to the forest to search for materials. When it was about time, he returned to pick up the bodies. There was no such thing as being kind or unkind. They wanted to fight themselves, and it was not Heath who instigated it. What did it have to do with him? He was just a mere spectator. It would not be too much for him to take some benefits, right? Did he have to take the initiative to step out and stop the dispute? Take sides? Tell them the truth, the good, and the beautiful, and promote world peace? Even if he could tell them, others would have to listen to him, right? He didn't have the ability, nor did he have the obligation, right? Moreover, strictly speaking, according to his standpoint, he was the enemy of the apprentices here. He was just a bystander instead of clapping his hands. Heath felt that he was already considered to have a conscience. Just like that, they kept fighting, and Heath kept picking and picking. Heath did not know why these apprentices were so bitter that they would not rest until they were dead. It was probably due to the inertia of the war. Perhaps the original intention was to fight for the ownership of the Forest of Souls, but when they started fighting, their minds were completely filled with hot blood. At this time, their minds were completely filled with blood. Anyone who had experienced it would know that it was impossible to listen to any advice. Their minds had completely put down their thinking and reason. The rules, shackles, and logic that they usually had disappeared. Now, they had probably forgotten the original intention of the war. Their bloodshot eyes were completely filled with anger and killing. At such a time, there was only one thought in their minds. Kill. 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 Chapter 104, Strange. At the same time, Shadow Tower. After a month of repair, the Shadowland that had been destroyed by the Third Circle spell had regained some of its vitality. The collapsed main tower had been rebuilt with the help of magic. The destroyed houses around it had also been repaired. Even the land that had been destroyed by the scorching flames had been covered with new vegetation. Unfortunately, the thick dark clouds at the top of the tower had disappeared. There was no shadow, and the tower was no longer as majestic and imposing as it used to be. Many of the apprentices had already left, and the ones who remained were all frowning and cultivating in their rooms. The tower, which used to be bustling with people, suddenly became much quieter. At this moment, on the top floor of Shadow Tower, in the Wizard Master's room. In front of her desk, the new Wizard Master of the Shadow Tower, which Cassandra, was feeding a basket of grey mouse pups to the owls in the cage. The old witch's shriveled hands, which were like chicken claws, grabbed the grey mouse pups and threw them into the cage. The owl, which smelled the delicious food, opened and closed its beak and swallowed one of the mouse pups. Which Cassandra said leisurely, "Eat, eat. Eat more. Only when you are fat can you eat meat. When you are old, you can't chew bones." Knock, knock, knock. At this moment, there was a knock on the door. Cassandra said without raising her head, "Come in." The door opened with a creak, and Wizard Edith in a crescent-colored robe appeared at the door. He bowed his head and greeted, "Wizard Master." Cassandra waved her hand. "All right, it's just the few of us. There's no need to talk about such formalities." After a pause, she asked, "How's Blair?" Edith said, "His injuries have stabilized. There shouldn't be too much of a problem, but it'll take at least a few years for him to fully recover." Cassandra nodded. "It's good that he's fine. A few years is like a snap of the fingers for a wizard." Edith sighed. "But it takes 600 years to get stronger." Cassandra raised her head and glanced at him. The old witch couldn't help but laugh. "He, I always thought that only those black rats were filled with resentment. When is a normal wizard not as calm as water?" Edith did not deny it. Even weak humans know the principle of a country's destruction and downfall. At this point, he became a little emotional. "Wizard Master, do you know? We spent a whole 600 years to obtain the right to be a ruler. Only then did we take control of the scepter. Only then did we have 126 resource areas and more than 1,000 apprentices. And now, just because of your words, these things are all given away. Do you know that just now, more than 60 apprentices left Shadowland?" He sighed. "We built this place for 600 years, but I'm afraid it won't take us 6 months to destroy this place, and these are all your words." Cassandra said jokingly, "I can't take the blame for this. The ones who defeated Shadow Tower is the Third Circle Spell Scroll, Ivory Tower, Labyrinth Academy, and those, more than a dozen wizards working together." Edith interrupted, "We didn't lose at all." He said indignantly, "There's only one Third Circle Spell Scroll, and we still have the Stone Golems, the Treant Army, and the Protective Array. Just those weak bugs outside, and their rat army. If you hadn't insisted on doing it, even I alone could have easily killed those apprentices and made them regret coming to this world," Edith said coldly, "and let them know who the real king of the Underdark Tresia is." Cassandra fell silent. Edith's words were rampant, but they were not purely exaggerated. Shadow Tower had dominated the Underdark Tresia for more than 600 years, occupying at least half of the resources in the entire Underdark Tresia. The powerful wizard organization that had poured out so many resources was not only represented by more than 30 wizards. Wizard formations, wizard tools, scrolls, potions. Although the allied forces seemed to have suffered heavy losses that day, they had actually suffered an unprepared loss and were caught off guard by a third circle spell. However, other than this third circle spell, the allied forces could no longer come up with any decent offensive methods. If they were to continue fighting, it was not an exaggeration to say that even if an apprentice was given the helm of this tower, they would still be able to fight back and forth with the allied forces. Even if they did not completely defeat their opponents, Edith still had full confidence in defending Shadowland. As long as they did not lose, they would win. After all, it was impossible for a coalition of more than 10 or even dozens of wizard organizations to be united. Once they could not take down the enemy for a long time, internal strife was inevitable. There were also a lot of fence-sitters waiting for the diligent king to make a contribution in the Underdark Tresia. But Cassandra surrendered at this time? Surrendered? She surrendered without using her full strength, not even sending out all the stone puppets and alchemy tools. She gave up the 600-year foundation of Shadow Tower. Edith frowned and asked in puzzlement, "You should be able to say it now, right? What is the reason? What is the reason that made you give up being the ruler and put down the scepter?" Somewhere in the Forest of Souls. The war that had lasted for a few hours finally came to an end. There were 5 apprentices left on the empty land. They were Mithril Fortress and Scorching Valley. At this moment, the 5 apprentices were standing on the grass that was dyed red with blood. Their expressions were excited. As if they were possessed, they kicked the corpses on the ground and cursed and laughed as if they were venting. Ha ha ha! Get up, you bunch of self-righteous things! You're just a bunch of dogs from Shadow Tower. Now that you don't have a master, who do you think you are? How dare you act so arrogantly? Bastards from the Dusk Mill, I've long been displeased with you. If it weren't for those bastards from Shadow Tower, I would have brought people to destroy your trash long ago. Dusk Mill, Mithril Fortress, and Scorching Valley were all relatively close to each other. In the past, there had been some friction between them, and the slightly stronger Dusk Mill had always been hated by the other two. It was as if the resentment that had accumulated for many years had been released. At this moment, a few apprentices were humiliating the corpses on the ground to their heart's content. Heath, who was hiding in the dark, could not help but frown when he saw this scene. How should he put it? There was a strange feeling. In the past, there had always been enmity between them. Now that order had collapsed, it should be normal for them to fight each other. However, Heath felt that it was strange. In fact, this strange feeling was not only present today. To be exact, it had appeared on the day the news of the upper echelons of Shadow Tower being wiped out came back. However, he did not have the time to think about it since he was either thinking about fighting or fleeing for his life. Now, as a bystander, he felt that the whole thing was a little strange, as if. He, I really did not expect the little lambs to have such an angry side. At this moment, a sinister laugh suddenly sounded. Following that, 3 extremely powerful elemental waves swept over. Heath was shocked and quickly went into stealth mode. Then, 2 men and a woman walked in from the bushes. They had strange appearances and were wearing pitch-black cloaks. The moment they saw these 3 people, including Heath, the expressions of the people in the center of the field changed. The words were almost blurted out, Dark Wizards. Chapter 105, Scepter. Dark Wizards were a special group of wizards. Mentioning them would always make people associate them with the words terrifying, crazy, neurotic, perverted, and so on. If the wizard world was compared to human society, they were the terrorists who had antisocial personalities and would even carry out their actions. In the wizard world, there was a rule that did not apply. If one encountered a dark wizard who was evenly matched in the wild, then there was no need to think about it. The first thing they had to do was run. Boom. Without the slightest hesitation, the few apprentices who had been celebrating their victory immediately turned around and ran. It was as if they had seen a flood or a terrifying monster. At the same time, the 3 dark wizards also made a move. These 3 people were a bald man, a fat man, and a witch. The one who made the first move was the fat man. The fat man was the first to leap up. His meatball-like body actually leaped a few meters high and caught up to a female apprentice in an instant. He lifted his cloak outward, revealing a large mouth on his stomach. His long tongue rolled forward and swept this female apprentice over. After catching the prey, he grabbed both of the prey's shoulders as if he was tearing apart a cooked frog. However, he did not seem to use much strength. With just a light pull, he tore the female apprentice into 2 halves. The fatty then stuffed the female apprentice into the big mouth in front of his chest. With a few caw-caw sounds, the female apprentice was swallowed whole, and the scream stopped abruptly. Then, the fatty stretched out 2 scarlet tongues, one big and one small, and licked his lips. He looked very happy, and the words he said made people's scalp go numb. However, they saw him laughing loudly. Haha, the taste of the living is still good. On the other side, the bald man and the witch also made a move. The witch raised her hand, and the mouth on her palm spat out a dark green poisonous fog. The poisonous fog quickly wrapped around the 2 running apprentices. They stumbled and instantly fell to the ground while they were running. Then, they heard a loud puchy-puchy sound. White smoke rose from the bodies of the 2 apprentices, and they actually corroded at a speed visible to the naked eye. The last bald man did not make any movements. A hand drilled out from his cracked head and snapped its fingers in the air. With a clatter, black smoke rose from the bodies of the 2 running apprentices and they fell to the ground without a sound. In the blink of an eye, the battle came to an end. These 3. Although he had heard all kinds of legends about dark wizards when he was in the tower, when he finally saw them today, he still felt that it was an eye-opener. They were really different from ordinary wizards. From the elemental reaction, the 3 of them should be between advanced apprentices and peak apprentices. There were quite a few apprentices at this level in Shadow Tower, but in terms of combat style, none of them could compare to them. Looking at the entire scene, there was not a single unnecessary word. Once they started, they went straight for their vitals, concise and clear. The spells they used were also extremely fast-acting moves, killing 5 apprentices in an instant. A wizard's fighting style could indirectly reflect a wizard's fighting ability. Using different fighting styles at the same level of strength would result in completely different fighting abilities. Ever since he advanced to a high-level apprentice, there was not a single apprentice in the tower that could make Heath feel fear. However, the 3 in front of him really made him feel a chill down his spine. On the other side, after the battle ended, the fatty immediately shouted at the witch, "Roxanne, how many times have I told you to stop using your dog shit spell to destroy my snacks? You're courting death." The witch snorted coldly and said in a tit-for-tat manner, "Humph, are you the only one who needs to practice spells? Doesn't my poison need to be improved?" The fatty roared, "Then you can go to the human world. Those lowly insects are enough for you to kill to your heart's content. You don't need to destroy precious snacks here." The bald man stopped the dispute between the two of them. "Enough, you two. Grice, eating 1 or 2 fewer corpses won't starve you to death. Roxanne, Grice's words are reasonable. The human world is more suitable for you." Roxanne snorted lightly and did not say anything else. The bald man then looked thoughtfully in the direction of Heath. "Did the remaining one run away?" Grice said. "The smell suddenly disappeared." Roxanne said, "Or maybe he used some kind of invisibility spell. Do you need me to force him out?" The hair on Heath's body stood on end. He pressed down on the crossguard sword and at the same time, he was ready to escape at any time. These 3 were not easy to deal with. He was not confident in a 1v3. Fortunately, the bald man quickly waved his hand and said disdainfully, "There's no need. Don't waste that magic power. It doesn't matter whether you kill a negligible reptile or not. Just let him be." Then, his gaze returned to the corpse on the ground. He looked at the magic stone pocket hanging on the waist of the corpse and his eyes were excited. "Ha ha ha, I love this era." After saying that, he walked up and took the magic stone pocket from the corpse and the wizard tool he carried with him. However, just as he touched the first corpse, the bald man's expression suddenly changed. He saw that he pulled out a medium-sized magic staff that was about 1 meter long from the corpse. This magic staff was not quite the same as an ordinary wizard staff. It was completely golden in color, and it was covered with all kinds of gemstones and crystals. At the top, there was a large diamond-shaped gemstone, and it was wrapped with mithril. It looked full of nobility. It did not look like a magic staff that was commonly used by wizards. Instead, it looked like a staff that symbolized royalty in the human world. In fact, it was the same here. The moment they saw this staff, everyone present, including Heath, was shocked. The 3 dark wizards almost shouted the same name at the same time, Ruler's Scepter. Yes, the thing that appeared in front of them was none other than the Ruler's Scepter that was once controlled by Shadow Tower and symbolized the highest authority in the Underdark Tresia. At the same time, in the Shadow Tower. "What is the reason that made you give up being the ruler and put down the scepter?" Wizard Edith's voice echoed in the spacious Wizard Master's room. There was a long silence. After a while, Witch Cassandra poured all the baby mice in the basket into the cage. "Go and eat as much as you can." Then, the old witch turned around and asked Edith, "Edith, haven't you realized it yet? All the coincidences and wrongs in this incident?" Chapter 106, Tower of Order. Edith was stunned for a moment. "What do you mean?" Cassandra said, "I've felt that something was very strange ever since the 3 ring towers rejected our request for assistance. We didn't make any rude requests to them. We just hoped that they would express their stance when necessary. This wouldn't cause them any losses at all. They wouldn't even have to pay a single magic stone, and they could use this as an excuse to extort a sum of money from us. According to the habits of these greedy vampires in the past, they should have gone to get the sacks early in the morning. Even if we didn't make any requests, they should have taken the initiative to contact us to offer help. However, when we took the initiative to ask for help, they refused. They refused without any hesitation and rejected the magic stones." Cassandra frowned. "Do you know? This is as amazing as me suddenly realizing that I don't need to use magic power to cast spells." She continued, "Before I could figure it out, those clowns attacked us. They were always as timid as mice, but they were actually so arrogant. They even took out a third circle spell scroll. It really surprised me. At first, I even thought that this was the work of the three ring towers, but I couldn't figure out what benefits it would bring them. They actually put themselves in danger. Putting aside the 600 years of friendship between us, the ruler had interfered with another ruler's internal affairs without permission. Breaking the rules like this would be a matter of shuffling the cards. What happened later also proved that the three ring towers had nothing to do with this. The Wizard Master and the others were completely wiped out, the clowns from the Labyrinth Academy, the Third Circle Spell Scroll, and so on. All of these are purely coincidences. Her expression suddenly became serious. But this is the biggest problem. Wizard Edith was stunned. What problem? Which Cassandra said, everything that happened was too coincidental. Once or twice is fine, but so many coincidences happened in such a short period of time, and they all happened at the same time. We all know that such coincidences cannot truly be a coincidence. Wizard Edith was shocked. You mean? Which Cassandra nodded and said, that's right. Fate Department. Someone has set up a chessboard in the Underdark Tresia. They want to pull all of us chess pieces up there and kill each other. Look at the Underdark Tresia recently. Those idiots seem to have gone crazy and completely lost their minds. If it wasn't for the Fate Department's magic causing trouble, how could this land suddenly become so chaotic? Wizard Edith opened his mouth and said in realization, I see. I see. So you wanted me to surrender because you didn't want to get involved in this dispute. Which Cassandra nodded. Someone stirred up the fate of the war, and this land will inevitably have a war. If we persevere to the end, according to the trajectory of fate, we will inevitably continue to be attacked. Even if we defeat Labyrinth Academy and Ivory Tower, there will still be Thorn Forest and Red Square. Unless the fate of war comes to an end, we can only obediently be a chess piece and fight non-stop until we die. After a pause, Cassandra continued, in this case, it's better to jump out of the chessboard as soon as possible. They can play with them however they want. When they've played enough, and when the matter is over, we'll do what we should do. The ruler's scepter is a scepter that only the ruler has, not the ruler who has a scepter. Wizard Edith completely understood. At once, his expression towards Witch Cassandra became one of admiration. Although they were all wizards, a young wizard like him who had advanced for less than 100 years was still far from being enough in terms of strength and experience compared to the older generation of Witch Cassandra in the Shadow Tower. She had lived much longer than him, and her experiences were far beyond what he could hope to achieve. Wizard Edith said solemnly, Lady Cassandra, I need to apologize for my previous offense to you. My anger made me lose my mind. Cassandra laughed and said, it's just the three of us. There's no need for that. Edith nodded. But then, he seemed to have thought of something and suddenly asked, but who's behind this? And what's the purpose? Cassandra sneered and looked out of the window in a certain direction. Who is it? Isn't it obvious? In the entire West Coast, other than that lord, who else has the ability to turn the entire wizard region into a chessboard and play with the fate of so many people? Other than the Tower of Order, who else? Forest of Souls. The ruler's scepter. The exclamations in unison exploded in the forest, and the three dark wizards were all startled. Speaking of the ruler's scepter, they first briefly introduced the structure of the West Coast, and even the entire wizard world. The entire West Coast was divided into parts of the wizard territory, and the Underdark Tresia was one of them. The entire Underdark Tresia was divided into many resource areas, such as Shadowland of the Shadow Tower and the Labyrinth Castle of Labyrinth Academy. The resource areas were under the control of various wizard organizations, and these wizard organizations were under the rule of the ruler. There were a total of 26 wizard territories in the entire West Coast, which meant that there were 26 rulers. And these 26 rulers were all ruled by a powerful wizard organization, which was the true ruler of the entire West Coast. Their name was the Tower of Order. If Shadow Tower was the king of Underdark Tresia, then the Tower of Order was the king of the West Coast. And the ruler's scepter was a wizard tool issued by the Tower of Order to the lords under them to exercise authority. The pictographic analogy was like the official seal used to sign documents on the desk of the U.S. state government. All of a sudden, the three of them went crazy. They held the scepter and laughed crazily. Ha ha ha. Ha ha ha. The ruler's scepter. I didn't expect the ruler's scepter to fall into our hands. Now we are rulers too. Ha ha ha. Although this thing did not have many practical uses, the meaning of the identity it represented was still very pleasant to hold in one's hands. After all, the pleasure of having sex with a woman of the same beauty, coupled with the two different titles of prostitute and princess, was also completely different, wasn't it? However, before the two of them could be happy for long, suddenly, a faint layer of light appeared on the scepter, and then it quickly faded and transformed at a speed visible to the naked eye. The glittering scepter instantly turned into a piece of rotten wood. It was like a shape-shifting spell. The smiles on the faces of the three instantly froze. The bald man said with a gloomy expression, "Piece of shit." As he spoke, he raised his hand and waved a wind blade, cutting the wood into two pieces. Tisk. Roxanne curled her lips. I was thinking of bringing it back to be a collectible. All right, let's not waste any more time. Let's continue hunting. Fatty Grice refused. My cooperation with you ends here. It has nothing to do with me where you go now, but don't appear in front of me again. Otherwise, I can't guarantee that I won't eat you. As he said that, he picked up a corpse and stuffed it into his mouth to eat. Roxanne sneered. You can try. The bald man thought for a moment and said, separate? That's fine too. These pieces of trash are indeed not worth the three of us gathering together. He split the magic stone pockets and the wizard tools he had just obtained into 3 portions and threw one to each of them. As usual, each of us will get 1 portion. Take a look. If there aren't any problems, let's part ways here. The two of them took it over and counted it. They then nodded and hung it on their waists. In that case, goodbye. Goodbye. After confirming that there were no objections to the distribution, the bald man said goodbye and left in one direction. The witch Roxanne also went in the other direction. Only Fatty Grice was left in the forest. At this time, he was busy stuffing the corpses on the ground into his big mouth on his chest. His appetite seemed to be quite good. When he stuffed a whole corpse into his mouth, it would disappear with a few clicks. Not even a bit of residue would come out. It was like a bottomless pit. After eating so much, he didn't even burp. After eating, he still looked unsatisfied. He muttered to himself, the snacks are too delicious. Snacks, I want more snacks, snacks. This couldn't help but make Heath, who was hiding at the side and waiting to loot the corpse, extremely angry. This was a natural enemy. He himself relied on looting corpses for a living, but this guy ate all the corpses, so what was he doing? Heath frowned. One hand pressed on the cross sword at his waist. Chapter 107, Provocation. Heath did not deny the reason why he wanted to kill the other party. Other than the fact that their attributes countered each other, the other party's magic stone pocket was also a big inducement. He felt that there was nothing shameful about this. From an ideological point of view, the dark wizards in this world were specifically here to cause destruction. Their ideology did not bring any positive meaning to this world. It was simply killing for the sake of killing, an extremely antisocial personality. According to the rules, it was the duty and responsibility of every wizard to report the dark wizards. If it was during peacetime, the head of a dark wizard could easily be exchanged for a large number of magic stones in any wizard stronghold. In short, for various reasons, Heath decided to do it. After making his decision, Heath began to prepare for the battle. He first took out the hound's nose that he had obtained from the secret plane. As the name suggested, this wizard tool was made to mimic the smell of canines. When assembled, it could greatly enhance the sense of smell of wizards, and they could easily track the target even if they were hundreds of miles away. Heath put on the hound's nose and first recorded the smell of the fat man's body. Then, he retreated into the forest and began to prepare for the battle. There was a military strategy extracted from Count Croya that said, plan before you act. Heath's character would not fight a battle that he was not confident in. Judging from the combat ability that the fat man had displayed just now, he should be one of the 3 great combat systems of wizards. This type of wizard focused on using various body modifications, organ transplants, and bloodline strengthening to greatly enhance the attributes of their 3 limbs. They fought purely through powerful physical means. As a knight, it was relatively easy to judge the other party's physical attributes. Heath speculated that this fatty's strength should not be lower than 50 points, and his vitality still needed to be observed for the time being. From the perspective of agility, his movement ability should be on par with his. 50 points in strength, 20 points in agility, and an unknown vitality. At this level, he was already quite a terrifying monster. Without undoing the advanced apprentice seal, Heath did not have full confidence in defeating his opponent. As for unsealing in the battle, that was his biggest trump card and biggest secret apart from the extraction system. Unless it was absolutely necessary, he would not reveal it. A few days later, at night, in a certain forest north of the Forest of Souls. Boom! 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 A violent explosion reverberated in the forest. Fireballs, frost, lightning, wind blades, all kinds of magic light beams moved back and forth in the forest, lighting up the dark night sky. A battle was taking place in the forest. The battle was between two parties. On one side was a team of more than 10 low, intermediate, and even one advanced level apprentice. The emblem on their cloak indicated their identity. The Church of Light was a small wizard organization that resided around the Forest of Souls. However, there was only one person who was fighting with them. It was an apprentice with a huge mouth on his chest that looked like a monster. He was outnumbered, but the Church of Light did not gain any advantage. Instead, they were beaten up by the single apprentice until they could not breathe. Fire! With a short incantation, a fireball the size of a basketball flew out from the hand of an apprentice of the Church of Light. It drew an arc and flew towards Grice. Facing the incoming fireball, Grice did not dodge at all. He allowed the fireball to explode on his body. The flames quickly engulfed his entire body. However, other than the remaining fragments of his cloak being burnt, there was not the slightest bit of damage left on Grice's body. Even his skin was not black at all. Looking at this horrifying scene, the Church of Light was almost in despair. Monster! Monster! This is a monster! A monster! Amidst the exclamations of the apprentices, Grice laughed out loud. Like a toad, he leaped and threw the apprentice who had released the fireball to the ground. Then, he grabbed the apprentice and stuffed him into his mouth in front of his chest. With a few cracking sounds, he ate him. The apprentices of the Church of Light's eyes turned red as they let out hysterical roars. Ow! Bastard! I want your life! Everyone did their best to wave the magic wands in their hands and release one spell after another. However, in the face of the absolute difference in strength, their attacks were completely futile. Other than a few spells that were slightly more powerful, which Grice would make way for, the remaining spells seemed to be tickling him. After a round of attacks, not only did they not cause him any harm, but there were also a few more corpses on the spot. The disciples of the Church of Light were in despair. The high-level apprentice, Paul, who had just taken over the position of Wizard Master, pulled his sister, Celia, over and handed her a cross-shaped, golden scepter. This was the Wizard Master scepter of the Church of Light. Paul said resolutely, Celia, take the scepter of light and leave this place. After I die, you will automatically take over as the Wizard Master of the Church of Light. Celia's eyes were filled with tears. She shook her head and said, No. No. Paul's eyes were red. Please, my sister. The previous Wizard Master of the Church of Light, who was also Paul's mentor, had died 2 days ago when he led people to fight against other wizard organizations. Now, this place was the power of the Church of Light. As the Master of the Church of Light, Paul would never allow the Church of Light to be destroyed by his hands. He pushed Celia away forcefully. Go. After saying that, he rushed back to the battlefield without looking back and stopped Grice with his companions. Tears streamed down Celia's face. However, seeing that her fellow countrymen kept sacrificing themselves in order to give her a chance to survive, she finally did not hesitate anymore. Gritting her teeth, she held onto the Master Wizard's scepter and ran out. However, before she could run far away, Grice laughed out loud. You want to run? After saying that, he swept his large hands forward and sent the 2 apprentices who were blocking his way flying. Following that, he opened his large mouth in front of his chest and a long scarlet tongue immediately stretched out straight, instantly wrapping around Celia's ankles. Before Celia could react, she was pulled back by the scarlet tongue. No. Paul's eyes were about to pop out. It was inevitable for Celia to feed the humans, but at this moment... Clang! A crisp sound was heard, as though some thin metal was vibrating. In the darkness, a dazzling cold light suddenly lit up, like a bolt of lightning that tore through the night sky, or like the light at dawn. A figure suddenly appeared in the forest. A black cross-shaped sword swept across the scarlet tongue. With a pu sound, the scarlet tongue, which had resisted everyone's spells without moving at all, was instantly cut open. Celia, who had been caught by the tongue, also fell down. At this moment, she was panicking and holding the scepter, completely at a loss. Until that voice rang out. Miss, I guess you need help now. She raised her head subconsciously, and what greeted her was a pair of eyes that were as bright as the stars, and there was a smile on his handsome face that was like that of a gentleman. He was tall and straight, holding a sword with one hand and helping her with the other. His black cloak fluttered in the night wind, and his entire body exuded an indescribable aura. For some reason, Celia suddenly felt at ease. She reached out and grabbed the man's hand. Thank you. However, at this moment, Grice's voice sounded from behind again. Where did this damned bug come from? How dare he hurt me? Upon hearing this voice, Celia's pretty face turned pale, and her body trembled violently. The rest of the members of the Church of Light in the surroundings were also trembling all over, and they looked as if they could not even stand properly. In front of that terrifying demon, everyone was terrified. However, Celia quickly discovered that there was not the slightest trace of fear in the eyes of the man before her. He did not even bother with the demon. Instead, he consoled her. You're welcome. No gentleman man would turn a deaf ear to a weeping young lady. Veins popped up on Grice's forehead when he was ignored. Just as his patience was about to reach its limit, Heath's gaze finally landed on Grice. He casually grabbed his sword with one hand and swung it twice in the air. A faint sneer hung on the corner of his mouth. His expression was contemptuous and disdainful. He said contemptuously, "The last person who yelled at me has already become a ghost under my sword. And you, if you don't kowtow to this young lady and admit your mistake, I will chop you into pieces and feed you to the dogs." Chapter 108, Anger. Perhaps Heath's acting was a little too much, or maybe Grice wasn't that stupid. In short, in the face of Heath's arrogant provocation, he didn't roar and charge forward. Instead, his expression became a little more guarded. Grice was very clear on how strong his constitution was. Even if his tongue was a weak part of his body, it wasn't something that ordinary attacks could hurt. The fact that he had fought with the disciples of the Church of Light for so long was the best proof. However, this kid who suddenly appeared cut off a part of his tongue with a sword. It was enough to prove that he had a reason for his arrogance. He stared at Heath warily and asked, "Who are you?" As he spoke, he secretly activated his magic power. The broken part of his tongue immediately began to squirm. Scarlet flesh sprouted out, and the injured tongue instantly recovered to its original state. Seeing this scene, Heath could not help but smack his tongue in his heart. What a perverse recovery ability! He did not know how this kind of recovery ability was achieved. If he could preserve the corpse, he would definitely use it to extract it. As he was calculating in his heart, Heath continued to provoke him. So the so-called dark wizards are such cowards who bully the weak and fear the strong? Why is this kind of trash still here to embarrass himself? Get as far away from me as possible. The group of disciples from the Church of Light were dumbstruck. They were about to be beaten up by Grice. How could they imagine such a taunting provocation? Grice's face was furious, and all the muscles in his body bulged. But he quickly controlled his emotions. Although he did not know where this guy had so much confidence to provoke him, the more he did so, the more Grice felt that there was a conspiracy behind this. One had to know, from the elemental reaction of the other party, this was only a middle-level apprentice. Therefore, he simply hid his head like a turtle, completely ignoring Heath's provocation and insults. He walked over and ate the corpse on the ground. There were many conspiracies and tricks in the world of dark wizards. Grice's calmness could not help but make Heath frown. Not falling for it. This was not easy to handle. At this moment, Grice's large tongue rolled up a corpse on the ground, preparing to swallow it. Heath had an idea and immediately walked forward. A short incantation was instantly cast towards the corpse. Curse burn! The surface of the corpse suddenly turned red and hot. With a bang, a ball of flames rose. Grice's tongue, which had been scalded, suddenly loosened and the corpse fell down. The flames quickly burned the entire body of the corpse, and with a series of sizzling sounds, the corpse was burned into ashes in an instant. Veins popped up on Grice's forehead, and he panted heavily like an ox. Heath's eyes lit up, and he thought to himself, "There's a chance." He immediately struck while the iron was hot, and his right hand quickly raised up. The hunting fire elements quickly swept over, and quickly gathered into several fireballs above his head. He then slashed down with his right hand, and the fireballs immediately whistled towards the few corpses on the ground. Bang! 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 A series of explosions sounded. The whistling fireballs accurately exploded on the bodies of each corpse, and the blazing flames instantly burned up. Grice's eyes turned red. No! He screamed hysterically and hurriedly rushed in front of the corpses in an attempt to save them. However, all of his abilities were focused on body modification, and he did not know any spells at all. He could only watch as the corpses were burned into ashes. All of a sudden, Grice froze on the spot as if he had been struck by lightning. In the next second, his eyes locked onto Heath. His bloodshot eyes could be seen clearly even from a distance. Under the cold gaze, Heath felt his hair stand on end for some reason. Did I go too far? He did not have time to think carefully because the completely enraged Grice had already launched an attack on him. I want you to regret being born into this world. He roared angrily and brazenly charged at Heath. Just in time. Heath, who wanted to test the strength of this fellow's attack, did not dodge. Instead, he snorted coldly, steadied his lower body, raised his cross-shaped sword, and made a starting stance. In the next second, he slashed forward with his sword, colliding with Grice, who was charging at him. Boom! A deafening sound rang out. With the two as the center, a material-like ripple was set off in the air, and a large amount of dust flew in all directions. Heath only felt as if an armored war chariot that was traveling at a high speed had crashed into his body. An overwhelming force came at him in an instant, shaking his palm until it went numb, and his cross-guard sword almost flew out of his hand. In less than a second, Heath was sent flying like a cannonball. Silver liquid metal instantly wrapped around Heath's body. He flew backward and crashed into the giant tree behind him. For a moment, there was a loud boom. Boom, and everywhere he passed, trees were sent flying. After crashing into several giant trees that could only be hugged by a few people, Heath finally stopped. Hoo-hoo! However, almost at the instant he landed, the sound of rushing wind came from above him. Grice fell from the sky, raising his fists and smashing them heavily onto the ground. Heath stepped aside and hurriedly dodged. Boom! That deafening loud sound came once again, and a 2-meter-wide crater appeared on the ground. It was just a single punch. This was the terrifying strength of a physical strengthening wizard. Looking at the mess and the terrifying damage on the ground, Heath could not help but suck in a breath of cold air. He was secretly glad that he did not choose to use force back then. Dark wizards indeed lived up to their reputation. As he was calculating in his heart, Heath raised his sword and summoned his shield. In the next moment, he once again engaged Grice, who was charging towards him. Ding! 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 Boom! 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 All of a sudden, one could only hear the sound of metal interweaving with a loud rumble in the forest. The two of them were like two mythical giants flashing back and forth in the forest. Dodging, ducking, and strength clashing. Wherever the two of them passed, it was as if the end of the world had arrived. Trees were flying everywhere, and the ground was exploding. This shocking scene made the disciples of the Church of Light tremble in fear. Their hearts were beating non-stop, and the intense pressure almost suffocated everyone present. This kind of battle continued for dozens of rounds. Under the intentional guidance of Heath, the battle situation was gradually shifted to the depths of the forest. Only after the two of them were completely far away did the oppressive feeling disappear. The disciples of the Church of Light who had survived the calamity heaved a long sigh of relief. Some of the weaker ones even collapsed to the ground. They looked at each other in dismay. Was that an apprentice of our Underdark Tresia? So powerful. He was able to fight that terrifying dark wizard for so long. His elemental reaction is only an intermediate level apprentice, right? How can he be so powerful? At this moment, an apprentice suddenly said, I remember who he is. Everyone's gaze immediately focused on him. This apprentice took a deep breath and said with a tone of worship, young, black hair, black cross sword, it's Shadow Tower, it's the sword wizard from Shadow Tower. The black-haired genius. With the help of Twilight Fortress and the apprentice trial, Heath was already famous among the apprentices in the Underdark Tresia. After the apprentice reminded them, everyone remembered. Ah! It's him. The magic genius who single-handedly blocked thousands of soldiers in Twilight Fortress? No wonder he's so powerful. So powerful. Listening to everyone's discussion, Celia could not help but turn her beautiful eyes to look in the direction where Heath had left. Her expression was filled with deep thought. Chapter 109, Hell. At the same time, in the Forest of Souls, the battle had already reached its climax. Boom! 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 A deafening rumble exploded in the forest. The huge muscular monster rampaged through the forest, sending trees and soil flying everywhere it passed. At this moment, Grice was completely enraged. His head that was filled with anger only had one thought: kill the enemy in front of him, kill this piece of trash that destroyed the food, and put him into his mouth to eat. Under this command, he was like a machine that did not sleep or rest. He chased after Heath relentlessly, looking as if he would not rest until he was dead. Under Grice's powerful attack, Heath also seemed to be unable to withstand it. He was forced to fight and retreat, unable to fight back. The two of them, one chasing and the other escaping, quickly arrived at an empty space in the depths of the forest. Just as they reached this place, Heath, who had been busy defending, suddenly slashed his sword at Grice. This sword strike was unprecedentedly swift and fierce. It was like a bolt of lightning that cut through the sky as it struck Grice. Grice only felt a wave of power coming at him in an instant and sent him flying. Since the start of the battle, Heath had finally gained the upper hand in terms of strength for the first time. Grice was sent flying 7 to 8 meters away. Due to his abnormal physical defense, he did not suffer much damage. He even continued to attack Heath as soon as he landed. However, his footsteps suddenly stopped after he had rushed out for a short distance. In front of him, Heath suddenly took out a long necromancer's staff. The surging elemental fluctuations in the staff were exceptionally eye-catching. Grice cried out in surprise, an official wizard tool. Heath changed his previous arrogance and did not give Grice any unnecessary explanation. He only chanted a long incantation and held the necromancer's staff with both hands, thrusting it heavily into the grass in front of him. Suddenly, an extremely huge hexagram magic array on the ground suddenly lit up, covering the entire forest. Whoosh! Whoosh! The sound of rushing wind could be heard. The fluctuations of the fire elements in the air suddenly became intense. Large amounts of fire elements could be seen sweeping over from all directions with the naked eye, and there were even flames appearing in the air. The ground cracked open one after another, and the lava-like flames surged out from the ground. It was a terrifying scene. Under the terrifying elemental fluctuations, the hatred in Grice's mind suddenly cleared up. An unprecedented sense of danger enveloped his entire body. His first reaction was to escape. He had to quickly escape from this deadly place. However, his years of battle experience told him that if he tried to escape at this time, he would definitely die. It was impossible for him to escape from the casting range of this huge spell before the spell was completed. Therefore, he did not retreat. Instead, he charged forward and charged towards Heath. Seeing that Heath was chanting a spell, Heath could not help but think to himself, "Your reaction is good. Unfortunately, it's too late." As he spoke, a transparent red shield suddenly appeared in front of him and enveloped him in all directions like an eggshell. At this moment, the spell that Heath was casting was the Hellfire Sea that Shadow Tower had given him as a reward 2 years ago. This kind of large-scale spell had a longer casting time, so when building a model, it would inevitably cast a protective spell to protect the caster from being disturbed while casting. The Hellfire Sea was a powerful spell that was comparable to an official ring spell. Its protective spell was naturally at the wizard level. How could it be broken by a mere apprentice like Grice? No matter how strong an apprentice was, he was still an apprentice. Driven by a strong desire to survive, Grice desperately raised his fist and smashed it at Heath over and over again. However, no matter how many times he attacked, the transparent shield did not move at all, blocking all of his attacks. Until Heath finished chanting the last character. Hellfire Sea. It was like the declaration of the god of death, but also like the death knell of the end of the world. The moment Heath's voice fell, the entire forest instantly underwent a shocking transformation. In the forest, balls of flames were ignited one after another. On the ground, pillars of fire shot up into the sky one after another. Countless fireballs descended from the sky, and countless fire dragons surged out from all directions. The entire forest instantly turned into a sea of fire. No! Amidst Grice's hysterical screams, the huge monster was drowned in the sea of fire. On the other side, outside the Forest of Souls, the people of the Church of Light who had just escaped into a forest and been injured stared in shock at the flames that soared into the sky in the distance. Even though they were several miles away, everyone could clearly feel the terrifying elemental fluctuations. Wizard! Wizard! Did a wizard make a move? That direction, seems to be the direction of the battle between the sword wizard and that monster. Could it be because of them? How is this possible? How can an apprentice use such terrifying power? Celia's expression changed. Paul, should we go and take a look? Before Paul could reply, the other apprentices' expressions changed. Are you crazy? It wasn't easy for us to escape. Celia frowned. But he saved us. The apprentices fell silent. Paul said, Celia, I know what you want to say, but now is not the time to thank him. Let's take care of ourselves first. If we are fated to meet again in the future, we will repay this favor today. Who knew who would win the battle between the two of them? Moreover, when they attacked Shadow Tower previously, the Church of Light had also put in a lot of effort. Celia opened her mouth as if she wanted to say something. However, Paul did not give her the chance. He waved his hand and said decisively, all right, let's leave quickly. Let's leave this crazy place like the Underdark Treesia as soon as possible. Let's go to the human world to hide for a while first. The Sea of Fire lasted for more than 10 minutes before it finally weakened with the depletion of the magic stones until it finally stopped. At this moment, the originally lush forest had disappeared without a trace, and was replaced by a scorched land. The cracked land was filled with pitch-black scorched earth, and the remaining charred trees were scattered everywhere. Everything in sight was black, as if it was hell. A voice that sounded like a leaky pipe sounded, and it was exceptionally clear in this scorched earth. Heath looked in the direction of the voice. The voice came from not far ahead, and there was a scorched monster standing there. The skin on his body had been burnt to a crisp, and the flesh below was also charred black. However, he was still breathing in the face of this terrifying injury. At this moment, he was mumbling food as he walked out with great difficulty, as if he was trying to escape from this terrifying scorched land. Heath could not help but smack his tongue. What a terrifying recovery rate! After saying that, he carried his sword and walked forward. Clang clang! 2 short syllables rang out. The humming sound of the cross-shaped sword and the sound of the cross-shaped sword piercing into a charred body. Grice, whose heart had been shattered, finally could not hold on any longer. His upright body fell forward with a loud crash. Boom! His huge body crashed heavily onto the ground, causing a large amount of dust to rise up. Phew! After taking a deep breath, Heath's heart suddenly relaxed. He's finally dead. Then, his gaze fell on the huge corpse in front of him. The excitement in his eyes was obvious. What good stuff can this guy extract from his body? With this thought in mind, he bent his knees and squatted down. He pressed a hand on the monster's body and muttered in his heart. Extract. Chapter 110, Order. Somewhere in the Underdark Treesia. Snap. The crisp snap of fingers rang out. The 2 running apprentices suddenly stopped in their tracks and their bodies suddenly froze. They staggered forward and fell down. Soon, there was no sound, only black gas gushing out from their noses and mouths. The bald man Jeff walked forward and bent down, intending to take off the magic stone pockets on the 2 apprentices. However, just as he took 2 steps forward, his footsteps suddenly came to a halt. He seemed to have suddenly sensed something and suddenly looked in a direction. Grice, this guy was actually killed. At the same time, the Sea of Dark Trees headed east, leading to an exit of the human world. A pure black horse carriage was speeding along a dirt road. Pulling the carriage were 4 similarly black goats. They were moving at lightning speed, causing dust to fly everywhere they passed. Inside the carriage, it was as still as water. Roxanne, who was wearing a black cloak, sat in front of a low table with her eyes closed. There was a crystal ball on the table, and the green aura in the crystal ball was constantly circulating. Her palms were tightly pressed against the crystal ball. Her tongue was licking the crystal ball from the depths of her mouth in her palms. She was constantly sucking away the green fog inside, as if she was tasting some kind of delicacy. Suddenly, Roxanne opened her eyes. Her expression was one of shock. She immediately turned her head and looked in a direction, gloating. Grice, that pig, is dead. In Shadow Tower. Wizard Edith asked in puzzlement, but what is the purpose of the Tower of Order doing this? To attack the ruler's wizard region for no reason, and just after the ruler passed away, they brazenly broke the rules. Aren't they afraid of the collective rulers rebelling? Cassandra shook her head and said, in fact, they didn't break the rules. Edith was shocked. What? They secretly cast fate-type spells on the entire wizard realm, causing the ruler to almost meet a catastrophe, causing the entire wizard realm's order to collapse into chaos and mutual slaughter. Wasn't such an action equivalent to slaughtering the ruler, breaking the rules? Cassandra nodded and said, yes, although their actions were excessive, they really didn't break the rules. After a pause, she explained, you're still too young and haven't experienced many things, but I think you should have heard about it. It happens every 100 years. Edith was suddenly shocked. You mean? Cassandra nodded. Yes, judging from the time, it should be about time. Their observers have probably already entered the Underdark Tresia. They're currently on the chessboard, observing the moves of the chess pieces. According to the rules, the Tower of Order can use any means to select qualified warriors for this matter. All rulers need to cooperate unconditionally. Edith frowned. This. After thinking for a while, he said angrily, then they should at least inform us in advance so that we can be prepared. Do they really want us to die? Cassandra explained, they did it on purpose. They deliberately used this time to make an example of us. Edith was stunned. What? Cassandra sighed softly. Our relationship with the Three Ring Towers is too good. The Three Ring Towers was the most rapidly developing wizard organization in the West Coast continent. It was also a powerful wizard organization whose strength was currently second only to the Tower of Order in the West Coast. Cassandra said, it wouldn't matter if it was in the past, but the growth of the Three Ring Towers in recent years has exceeded many people's expectations. If this goes on, it's only a matter of time before they catch up to the Tower of Order. Some people are very afraid. Edith frowned. Is there a need for that? The Three Ring Towers are only taking care of themselves and never reaching out. Is that wrong? Cassandra snorted. Taking care of themselves? I'm afraid only you would be so childish. She commented seriously, the Three Ring Towers have been unwilling to be left behind since the day they were established. No matter how harmless they appear, it can't hide their ambitions. They have been pretending to be grandsons for so many years, and they have already gained invincible strength under the watchful eyes of the Tower of Order. What do you think the Tower of Order will think? Edith was silent. Cassandra finally said, no matter where it is, there can only be one king. Either you die or I die. Dark Forest, Forest of Souls. Beep, extraction successful. Spiritual power plus 0.1. Beep, extraction successful. Wizard talent plus 1. Beep, extraction successful. Obtained knowledge, Lacrani's body modification manual. Beep, extraction successful. Obtained knowledge regenerative cells analysis. Beep, extraction successful. Soul energy plus 6. A series of notifications rang in Heath's ears. A large amount of unfamiliar knowledge surged into Heath's mind. He did not know whether it was because this guy was too strong or because he had a special type of knowledge, but the amount of knowledge he obtained this time was abnormally large. His head swelled up, and soon, Heath had already grasped this knowledge as quickly as possible. So that's how it is. He actually changed so many body organs and even changed all the blood cells in his body. No wonder he's so fierce. Even the blood cells of the splitting worm can fuse with his body. That's too abnormal. His metabolism is over 100%. No wonder he has to keep eating. He's really working hard to become stronger. After digesting all this knowledge, Heath could not help but be speechless. All of this knowledge was related to body modification, organ transplantation, cell fusion, blood mutation. In order to pursue the peak of strength, he had gone to all extremes. He was purely developing in the field of monsters. To be able to modify the body to such an extent, this thing is really a talent. While he was surprised, Heath was also very impressed. Body modification itself was a knowledge that had a threshold. The fusion of various organs, rejection reactions, alienation reactions, and so on, all needed to be considered in all aspects. This dark wizard was able to almost completely change his entire body. Just this move alone was far from what an ordinary apprentice could achieve. This set of knowledge structure, I'm afraid it's not far from becoming a wizard. The other party seemed to be using the body modification route to advance to a wizard, and his accumulation of knowledge was indeed not far from forming a complete system. If he was given some more time, he might really be able to form a complete spell system and advance to an official wizard. It's a pity that all of this is for nothing. Shaking his head, Heath put away the emotions in his heart. He did not know how many apprentices he had killed and how many bodies he had used as living experiments in exchange for this knowledge. It was only natural that he would be slaughtered. There was nothing to regret. Following that, he touched the body of the fatty and pulled out a magic stone pocket from the outside of his charred thigh. The magic stone pocket was a very special spatial product. When an attack was too powerful, it would enter an illusory state and be immune to attacks from the outside world. Because of this, the magic stone pocket would not be so easily destroyed. Heath extended his spiritual tentacle and wiped away the spiritual brand on the pocket. The fatty's abilities were in his physical body, so his spiritual and soul abilities were not that great. Heath easily removed Grice's spiritual brand and successfully took the spatial pocket for himself. His spiritual consciousness swept across the interior of the spatial pocket, and with this sweep, he immediately had an urge to feel dizzy. Magic stones that were as tall as a small mountain, dozens of wizard tools, and a mountain of materials. All kinds of valuables were almost stuffed into this pocket, which was more than 20 square meters. With a quick glance, the wealth inside was no less than 1,000,000 magic stones. Heath opened his mouth and said, "Isn't it said that dark wizards are poor people who can't afford to eat and wear clothes? If they are called poor people, what are we? Could it be?" Suddenly, Heath seemed to have thought of something. He quickly took out a few wizard tools and looked at the emblem on them carefully. After looking at it, he suddenly understood. So they were robbed. From the emblem on these wizard tools, it seemed that they were all from apprentices from various wizard organizations in the Underdark Tresia. For a moment, Heath was very happy. It's true that no grass is fat without horses, and no man is rich without windfall. One had to know that in order to buy spells, he had spent most of his magic stones in Shadow Tower. The remaining 20,000 to 30,000 had also been used up when he had just set up the Hellfire Sea. Right now, he only had a few thousand magic stones that he had picked up from the corpses of the apprentices in the Red Castle and the Dusk Mill. He was still penniless before, but in the blink of an eye, he had become rich. No wonder these dark wizards did not hesitate to travel thousands of miles to reach the Underdark Tresia. This money-grabbing business is indeed the best way to make a fortune. As his thoughts ran wild, Heath put away the magic stone pocket and the fat man's body and set off on the journey again. No matter how much money he earned from the bandit business, he was not the type to make a living like this. It was one thing to rob the dark wizards and pick up the bodies on the way, but it was better to do less evil things like hunting other apprentices on his own initiative. If everything was over, fate would end sooner or later. Chaos would eventually lead to order. Now, he had to make a list after the fun. With a powerful gold finger like the extraction system by his side, he was already in an invincible position. He had a bright future waiting for him. There was no need to ruin his future for the sake of a little benefit in front of him. With this in mind, Heath completely let go of the greed in his mind and quickly left. Not long after Heath left. Sizzle! A soft sound suddenly rang out in the quiet scorched land. Immediately after, the space twisted, and a man and a woman suddenly appeared on the ruins. If other spellcasters saw this scene, they would definitely be shocked. A spell that could cause spatial fluctuations must have at least 2 circles. In other words, this man and woman had the strength of at least a rank 2 wizard. There were not many rank 2 wizards in the entire Underdark Tresia, yet 2 of them had appeared here all of a sudden. Then, what was their background? At this time, it was dawn. The dawn sunlight shone down from the other side of the mountain and hit the 2 of them diagonally, illuminating their grey cloaks and the emblem on the cloak's chest. It was a strange emblem with a staff and a crown overlapping each other. This was a pattern that no one would be unfamiliar with in the Underdark Tresia, the West Coast continent, or even the entire Old Land. Tower of Order, Scepter Crown. Chapter 111, Chaos. Celis, the second-class observer of the Tower of Order, stood on the scorched land and looked around. Interesting. An apprentice can actually trigger elemental fluctuations of such energy. He squatted down and picked up a piece of charred wood. It should be at the wizard level. Judy, the second-class observer, said, "It's based on the power of the magic array." Celis said, "Even the power of the magic array is pretty good. Few wizards have mastered this kind of knowledge, and the one who arranged all this is just an apprentice." Judy nodded. Indeed. Few wizards studied the content of the knowledge of the magic array in depth, and it was rare for an apprentice to master this level. Celis continued to ask, "Who is he?" Judy took out a black notebook with a quill attached to it from her wide sleeves. On the buckle of the leather card was the face of a monster. She picked up the quill and tapped on the face on the notebook. Report. Yes, Honorable Judy. The notebook made a sound and then automatically opened. The pages flew everywhere. After a series of clattering sounds, it stopped on a page that recorded densely packed content. And on top of it, it was Heath's information. Judy looked at it as she read Heath's past as if it was a family treasure. His name is Heath Noen. He was brought here from the Forgotten Land by Sato 3 years ago. He recommended to enter the Shadow Tower to study. He performed very well after entering the Shadow Tower. He advanced to a low-level apprentice in less than half a year. After that, he received a compulsory mission from the tower and went to Reiden City to defend. During the defense, he eliminated a forest banshee left behind by a dark wizard apprentice. After that, he participated in the war between the Red Devil's Blood and Shadow Tower and was assigned to the Twilight Fortress War Zone. Celis could not help but ask, he went to the battlefield? How was his performance? Judy looked at the information, and her expression became a little strange. Celis asked, why? Judy hesitated for a moment. You should read it yourself. She could not think of any suitable adjectives. Even from the perspective of a wizard, she felt that this apprentice was a little strange. She even suspected that there was something wrong with the information book. Celis took the information book in surprise and started reading it. After reading it, his eyes lit up. He killed the enemy at the last minute, led the army in battle after the commander died, and even defeated an advanced apprentice with an official wizard tool. Haha, this kid is quite good at fighting. Judy said, I've never seen such an apprentice with such a serious bias. The information said that he was still a knight. Celis said, he's just energetic. He can't be satisfied with only the science of wizards. Judy said, a genius. Celis nodded and said, whether we are willing to admit it or not, we all know that geniuses do exist. There are such a group of people in this world. The content that others can only learn after racking their brains is not worth mentioning in their eyes. They can easily learn what others cannot learn, and easily achieve what others cannot achieve. This is talent, and it is not something that can be envied. Judy said, but according to the information, he only has the physique of a low-level wizard. Celis frowned. Low level. Indeed, it was a little too low. He continued to ask, what about the bloodline? Judy replied, Mood blood. Celis said with slight disappointment, that's really a pity. The path of wizards either had outstanding talent or a huge amount of resources. If he couldn't get either, then it would really be difficult to move forward. Judy asked, should we register him on the candidate list? Celis thought for a moment and nodded. Let's record it for now. As for other aspects, we'll see in a few years. If he's still alive, then we'll consider it when the time comes. Yes. More than a month later, in the capital city of the Kingdom of Navi, Kalara City. After more than a month of traveling, Heath arrived at the first town he passed after embarking on his journey. This was a human city-state located on the east side of the Underdark Tresia. Its population was about 100,000, and it was the capital city of the human Kingdom of Navi. From here to the south was Heath's destination, the Magic Bug Forest. After wandering in the wilderness for so long, Heath was a little tired. It was rare for him to come to a human city-state, so he decided to stay here for 2 days to recuperate. At this moment, in front of the gate of the city of Kalaru, a long line had already formed under the towering city gate. They were all civilians waiting to enter the city. Stuck in the line, Heath listened to the whispers of the people around him. I heard that your Helen kingdom is in chaos. Is that so? A son hacked a father to death. For the sake of that crown, there is no longer any law and order. The 6 great counts have joined hands to oppose the tyrant's rule, and the nobles are attacking each other. That is not chaos, but a complete loss of order. It's the same in the neighboring kingdom of Kara. I just escaped from there, and it's a mess. I'm afraid the kingdom of Navi isn't a safe place either. I heard that 2 days ago, news came that His Majesty the King has been unwell for several days. It's neither too early nor too late. You mean? SHH, lower your voice. Can't you see that there are people hanging on the city wall? Sigh, let's hope that something terrible doesn't happen. I just escaped from the Brun Kingdom. I don't know where I can run to if I keep doing this. What's going on in this world? Who knows? The human world was governed by the wizard world, and the wizard world was in chaos. Naturally, the human world couldn't be left alone. The human world that was affected also began to become chaotic. Recently, several countries had erupted into war for various reasons. If this continued, it was only a matter of time before it burned. Day. 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 At this moment, the sound of horse hooves came from behind. They saw a team of cavalrymen coming from afar. They were dressed in black and wore black armor. They were fully armed to the teeth and looked extremely murderous. The cavalrymen quickly entered and the crowd immediately started discussing. That emblem. It's Earl Robertson. Why did he suddenly come here? Count Robertson? Isn't that the second prince's matriarchal family? To appear here at a time like this. The king of the kingdom had had 3 wives in succession. Each of the 3 wives had given birth to a son for him, and the one who had just passed by was the second son's matriarchal family. Just as the news of the king's health had spread out from the palace, Count Robertson, who was far away at the border, had brought his troops into the city in full gear. Even children who did not know anything on the streets felt that this city was unusual. And the development of the matter indeed followed everyone's guess. The next day, early in the morning, the palace herald pasted the notice that had just been drafted onto the outer wall of the square. He announced with tears in his eyes, "Our respected king unfortunately lost his life to illness last night. His Majesty made a posthumous edict on his deathbed, appointing the second prince, Ishi, to succeed the throne." Chapter 112, Collect the Corpse. Translator, Dragon Boat Translation Editor, Dragon Boat Translation. The herald left with his men. The crowd did not show their due loyalty to the new king. Instead, they began to whisper among themselves. Letting the second prince take over the throne, this doesn't seem to be in line with the rules, right? I wonder what will happen when the first prince returns. The Navi kingdom respected the eldest son succession system. According to tradition, when the king was no longer around, the eldest son should be the one to inherit the throne. Under the circumstances where the first prince was still alive, it was clearly against the rules to appoint the second son as the heir. The people were all frowning. It's better to leave this place as soon as possible. I have a bad feeling. Sigh, where else can we go? There are wars everywhere now. The war is chaotic and there are many bandits. Don't die on the road without any reason. Yeah, I heard that a group of bandits came to the old forest recently. The girl from the cobbler's house was kidnapped. Until now, there's no telling whether she's alive or dead. It's better to stay. No matter what, there's still a nest here. At this moment, a man dressed like a gentleman walked over. This was Sister Lord Charles. Although he was called a lord, Charles was actually not a noble. The main reason why he had this title was because of his sisters. He was the only son in the family, but his parents gave birth to 7 sisters in one go. Each of his sisters had fair skin and beautiful looks. So, when Charles became an adult, he started his sister business, specifically introducing his sister to the city's high officials and nobles as lovers for the entertainment of the upper class. Once, one of his sisters served a royal noble. This noble had drunk a lot of wine at that time, and on a whim, he promised to give Charles a title of lord. Of course, the noble did not remember this incident, but his sister title of lord was spread because of it. Charles walked to the crowd and said in a loud voice, "Finding 2 corpse collectors. 1 silver coin for a day's wages. Anyone wants to come?" Although he did not get the title of noble, with so many sisters as lovers of high officials and nobles, he could often get some more profitable jobs. Hearing Charles's words, the crowd could not help but ask, "Charles, corpse collector? Why? Where did someone die? Didn't I hear recently that you sent your sister to the palace? Why, did someone die in the palace?" Charles cursed, "A bunch of bastards, don't ask what you shouldn't ask. The matters of the nobles are also something that you bumpkins can discuss? Just take the money to do things. Keep your mouth shut, or sooner or later, your heads will fall off." As he spoke, he made a gesture of cutting his throat. "Finding 2 corpse collectors and pay 1 silver coin a day. Who will come? I want to try." At this moment, a calm voice sounded. Charles turned his head and saw a young man in his early 20s walk out of the crowd. He had rare black hair, a fair and handsome face, and a pretty face. He glanced up and down and said in a disdainful tone, "Can you do the hard work?" Charles hated pretty faces because one of his sister's virginity had been taken away by a pretty face, causing him to lose a lot of money. Heath looked around and happened to have a huge rock at his feet. So he grabbed down with one hand and lifted the half-meter wide rock. Charles's eyeballs almost fell out. So strong. It's too powerful. Amidst the crowd's exclamations, he threw the stone down with a clang. He clapped his hands and asked, "Can I do it now?" Although the soul energy was definitely stronger for wizards, ordinary humans definitely had it too. Since he was going to rest here for a few days, he could earn some extra money and find some corpses to do some experiments on body modification. Charles nodded. "I didn't expect you to be so strong. All right, I'll leave it to you. Come with me." Heath followed Charles to the front. When they saw where they were going, the crowd burst into an uproar. "It's really in the direction of the palace. It looks like something happened in the palace." Some people were discussing and speculating, some were worried, and some had already started to pack up and run away. The smell of a storm was inexplicably spreading. On the other side, Heath followed Charles for a while. When they passed by a remote alley, he suddenly called Charles. "Wait." Charles turned his head. "What?" Heath raised his head and approached him. At the same time, he said, "Look at my eyes." Charles was stunned. Before he could recover, an inexplicable power invaded his mind. Charles immediately felt dizzy, and then his mind was completely out of his control. Darkness-type spell, hypnotic gaze of darkness. This was an illusion-type spell among the darkness-type spells. It was a spirit-type spell among the three major combat spells. Through eye-to-eye contact, one spiritual will would invade the other's mind. It was hidden and difficult to detect, and was very practical. Heath said, "Remember, I am the master. The duty of the corpse collector was only to take the corpses out and burn them. And Heath wanted to use these corpses for some experiments, so naturally, he had to control Charles first." Charles said in a daze, "Yes, you are the master." Heath said, "Obey all my will." Charles said, "Your will is better than Charles's." The hypnotic effect of the hypnotic gaze of darkness mainly depended on the wizard's own spiritual power and the spiritual power of the hypnotized subject. With the spiritual power of an advanced apprentice of Heath, it was impossible for an ordinary civilian like Charles to put up any resistance. In an instant, Charles was completely enslaved by Heath. After injecting the two wills into Charles's mind, he snapped his fingers and ended the hypnosis. Charles seemed to have just woken up. He looked left and right, and then his gaze fell on Heath beside him. He said in shock, "Master, what happened to me?" The hypnotic gaze of darkness was not just simple hypnosis to make others' minds blur. It was directly implanting commands into the minds of others. Once the instructions were implanted, the one hypnotized would believe them. Before the hypnosis was lifted, the hypnotized person would treat it as the truth and believe it. For example, if a virtuous woman was implanted with an instruction that she was a prostitute, she would really think that she was a prostitute. In addition, the daily life of the hypnotized person was still the same, and the mind was still the same. Heath said, "It's okay, let's go." Charles said, "Oh, okay." The two of them walked to the center of the city and soon arrived at the palace. As soon as they entered, Heath smelled a faint smell of blood. It seemed that a battle had happened here. In the spacious palace, there were traces of blood everywhere. The pale-faced servants were shivering as they cleaned up the traces. A man dressed as a guard saw Heath and Charles enter and quickly walked over. "What took you so long?" Charles said, "There are too many people on the road, sir." The guard did not waste any time and immediately said, "Quickly go in and clean up. His Majesty requests that this place be restored to its original state before sunset." Charles said, "Yes." After passing through a corridor, the two were brought to a courtyard in the palace. In the courtyard, there were corpses strewn all over the place. Some were dressed in the uniform of the palace guards, while others were the black armored knights who had entered the city the day before. At the very front was an old man who had an extraordinary temperament and was wearing a brownish-red leather coat. There were a few gems embedded in the side of his boots and a golden border. The clothing of the nobles of the kingdom of Navi had strict requirements. In this kingdom, only one person could wear such boots. His Majesty the King. Heath raised his eyebrows in surprise. He didn't expect to find the king's corpse. Speaking of which, he hadn't extracted a human king yet. At this level, he should be able to extract good things even if he was a human, right? Chapter 113, Manner. The guard ordered, "Carry His Majesty Orf's body and follow me." Heath took the opportunity to lightly touch it. "Extract," Beep, successful extraction. Obtained Navi cross sword technique. Beep, successful extraction. Obtained Navi secret manual. Beep, successful extraction. Obtained strategy for governing the country. Beep, extraction successful. Obtained King's Aura. Beep, extraction successful. Soul energy +6. Damn, what was all this nonsense? The most up-to-date novels are published on Fruitnoelo. The first two were barely enough, but the last two felt useless. Why would a wizard like him need governing strategy? And this King's Aura, what was this? Heath felt that his useless knowledge had increased again. Forget it, it's better than nothing. I picked it up for nothing anyway. Why bother so much? At least I've successfully extracted the soul energy. Shaking his head, Heath let go of his disappointment. Following the guards, they walked all the way inside. After passing through 2 corridors, they arrived at the palace's main hall. At this moment, there were already many people gathered here. There was a young king with a crown on his head, a well-dressed duke and minister, as well as people dressed as white-robed monks. In the middle of the main hall, there was a small altar made of flowers and olive branches. In the middle of the altar, there was a coffin. The guard said, "Put it here." The two of them put down the stretcher. Then, the monk walked forward and began to circle the body while reciting the scriptures. After 2 circles, a white-robed man shouted, "Saintess!" 2 young girls in white dresses and garlands walked out of the side hall, followed by a few handmaidens holding trays. On the wooden plates were gold basins, silver cups, and 2 gold awls. They removed their clothes and washed their hands twice in a gold basin filled with water. Then they walked to the body of the old king, picked up the body one after the other, and walked to the coffin in the center of the altar and put it into the wooden coffin. Then, the 2 girls knelt down in front of the coffin. The maids next to them each took a golden awl and walked forward. The girls sprinkled flower petals on the coffin, and then poured the virgin blood in the cup. The priest shouted, "In the name of the wizards, His Majesty will go to the land of bliss. Seal the coffin." Heath, who had been watching the whole ceremony, had an incredulous look on his face. What kind of messy cult ritual was this? However, it was not difficult to understand the background of the Kingdom of Navi. The wizard organization behind the Kingdom of Navi was called Blood Source, a small wizard organization with about dozens of people. It seemed that their training system needed to be nourished by virgins. Every once in a while, they would enter the world to enjoy the virgins that the kingdom had offered to them, including the first ritual when new people joined, which was to take turns to have sex with the members of the organization. It sounded like a perverted cult, but it was very common in the wizard world. Well, Heath felt that he was quite lucky to be able to join Shadow Tower in the first place. At least he didn't have to associate with these perverts who had strange worldviews. From this moment on, I am the king, ha 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 ha. The young king stood in front of the wooden coffin and laughed loudly. "Your Majesty!" The nobles bowed their heads to pay their respects. After the funeral ceremony, the guards found a carriage and helped to move the bodies in the palace to the carriage. The carriage was covered with a black cloth and was then handed over to Heath and the other 2 to drive away from the palace. According to the procedure, the carriage would go all the way to the outside of the city and find a place where there was no one to burn or bury the bodies. There was also a knight with a sword on him. In name, he was helping Heath and the others with their work, but Heath guessed that he was using it to silence them after the fact. After all, they had just seen the old king's lips turning blue with obvious signs of poisoning, so there was no reason to keep them after the work was done. So after leaving the city gate, Heath decisively looked into the knight's eyes and told him, "Your work is over. Go back and report." Under the effect of the hypnotic gaze of darkness, the knight jumped out of the carriage and went back. Abusing magic should have meant electrocution and whipping, especially when it was in someone else's territory. If they encountered a more pretentious matter, they might not be able to stop until the Dark Council extorted 300,000 to 500,000 magic stones. But now, it did not matter whether the rules were irregular or not. Whether the blood source still existed was a problem. Naturally, there was no need to worry about the magic management regulations. After chasing away the knight, Heath immediately asked Charles next to him, "Is there a manor or house nearby? It needs to be bigger and more remote." "Of course, master." Charles drove the carriage all the way south and came to a small forest. In the depths of the forest, there was actually a manor. According to Charles, this place was built here by a noble who liked to hunt in the city. One of his sisters had accompanied this noble twice, so he handed over the cleaning work to Charles. Charles took the opportunity to secretly make a key to this place. Walking into the manor, Heath looked around and nodded with satisfaction. This place is not bad. The manor was very large, and the size was similar to an ordinary manor. The main building was a 3-story high row house, with lawns, gardens, pools, stables, and other facilities. Heath thought silently, I can use this place as a base. I can study spells while I go to the Magic Bug Forest to collect materials. Magic Bug Forest was further south. It would not take more than 2 days to travel back and forth. If he sped up, it would be enough for 1 day. But I still need to prepare some servants. The nobles of the hunting village did not come many times a year. Every time they went out, they would bring their own servants. Of course, it was impossible for them to have permanent servants here. We'll talk about it later. Let's see if there's a slave market in the black market nearby. Let's see if there are any suitable female slaves. While thinking, Heath walked into the main building. After choosing a suitable room in the main building, Heath clapped his hands. The broom, mop, and other cleaning tools in the corner of the wall quickly cleaned the room. Then, Heath used the wizard's hand to move a few large tables and put them together. He also moved a few cabinets. Finally, he took out beakers, scales, test tubes, and other experimental tools from his space pocket and placed them on the table. A simple laboratory was completed. Bring the corpses in for me. Yes. Charles carried the corpses in diligently and piled them in a corner of the room. There were a total of 16 corpses, 3 of which were official knights, and the rest were apprentice knights. Heath walked over and extracted the corpses separately. Beep, extraction successful. Soul energy +2. Beep, extraction successful. Obtain some chant technique. Beep, extraction successful. The things that were extracted were mostly useless. Ever since the physical attributes were full, ordinary knights would not be able to obtain any attributes. Fortunately, the important soul energy could be extracted. Although it was not as much as what was extracted from an apprentice, it was still considerable. Especially when compared to demonized beasts or plants, it was really much higher. One had to know that during this period of time in the dark forest, Heath had also collected plants and hunted magical beasts. However, the amount of soul energy from these things was pitifully low, and it was only after 2 decimal points. And none of these corpses were lower than 1. Is it because the composition of the human soul is complicated? Or is it because of intelligent life? Heath thought curiously. Then, he took out the body of the fat dark wizard from his dimensional pocket and began the experiment. Chapter 114, Regeneration. Translator, Dragon Boat Translation Editor, Dragon Boat Translation. A few days later, Heath Laboratory, Forest Manor. In the dark room, the suet candles were sizzling, and the pungent smell of burning fat filled the air. The flickering flames lit up the interior of the room. A few long wooden tables were put together, and they were filled with strange materials, as well as organs such as the heart, liver, spleen, lungs, limbs, and so on. Heath, who was wrapped in a grey cloak, was standing in front of the wooden table. On the table was a corpse that had been stripped of its clothes. He was holding a sharp knife, and he was scratching the body of the cadaver. He looked like a medical student who was doing dissecting experiments. Clang! Clang! The iron cage in the lower right corner kept making noises. It was the few broken hands inside. They were unwilling to be imprisoned, and they kept shaking the iron cage with all their might while holding onto the railing. It looked like an organ that had been activated, but it was not. These broken hands had really come back to life. This was made by Heath using the cell structure extracted from the Dark Wizard's body. When Heath dissected the Dark Wizard, he found that the Dark Wizard's body had a cell structure with an unusually strong active factor. This thing was like a cancer cell, as if it would not die. It was also the regenerative cell recorded in the previously extracted knowledge. Fire roasting, electric shock, ice sealing. Heath had tried many methods, but he was unable to completely destroy these cells. After being suppressed for a while, they would quickly recover and quickly spread out. The Dark Wizard's abnormal recovery ability came from this. In a sense, these cells were even trying to repair the Dark Wizard's body. Of course, even if Heath allowed these injuries to heal, he would not know how many years it would take. Moreover, the Dark Wizard's soul had long been completely dispersed. Even if it was repaired, it would only be a body. However, it could not be denied that these regenerative cells were powerful. If he had these cells, as long as it was not a fatal injury, he would be able to recover in a very short time. In a sense, it was as if he had an immortal body. Therefore, after extracting these cells, Heath began to try to see how to use them. However, things did not go smoothly at this stage. He first found a corpse and implanted the cells into it intact, but there would be a rejection reaction. The body of an ordinary human could not withstand such a strong active factor. As soon as the cells were implanted, the body began to swell and distort and soon exploded. If it was not for Heath quickly sealing it with a barrier spell, the laboratory would have changed by now. Heath then brought over the corpse of a knight, but it was still the same problem. Although the night lasted longer, it ended with an explosion. Heath had calculated that it would take at least 100 vitality to fully withstand the cells, and only a grand knight could do that. How did the Dark Wizard do it? The answer was, body modification. Although this active factor would cause rejection in the human body, it was very compatible with some biological organs. For example, when Heath implanted the regenerative cells into the body of the short-tailed lizard, although it also exploded, the lizard's heart was preserved in the explosion, and it had integrated with the active factor completely, possessing an extremely strong regenerative ability. The Dark Wizard used this method to gradually replace the body with biological organs with better compatibility, thus mastering this regenerative ability. In order to have a strong regenerative ability, turning myself into a monster. Is it worth it? Heath did not know if it was worth it, but he still cared about his own body. Using this method to obtain a regenerative ability. Not to mention where to get the materials, just this mentality alone was unacceptable. Then is there a way to achieve the best of both worlds? To talk about a perfect fusion method, Heath had not yet found it, but he had some ideas on how to use this power. After his careful research, he found that after the active factor was injected into the body, it would quickly repair the cells in the body. After the cells were completely repaired, its energy had nowhere to be released, so it caused an explosion. In other words, as long as the body was in a state of injury and the regenerative energy was kept in a state of release, the body could have this power without exploding. Of course, this was the general idea, but it was obviously not easy to maintain a balance between the injury on the body and the ability of the cells to repair. Moreover, the risk was very high. If the injury was serious and could not be saved, the person would die, and if the injury was light, the person would explode again. Therefore, Heath improved the idea on the basis of this. Restricting this power. The reason for the explosion was that after the regenerative cells repaired the body, the energy could not be released. Then, couldn't he think of a way to quickly extract these regenerative cells after the body was repaired? To extract them just like that, was this cell a dog? It might sound incredible to extract the cells that had spread throughout the body in an instant, but there was no lack of such methods in the wizard world. And Heath had a very suitable plan in his hands, God's Seal. The God's Seal had the function of centralized energy management. Using the God's Seal, Heath could mark every primitive regenerative cell, and after using it, he would concentrate and seal the regenerative cells. When the primitive cells were sealed, the remaining fission factors would quickly lose their energy and wither to death, so there was no need to worry about the body exploding. To put it simply, the original process was to implant the regenerative cells, and the regenerative cells would divide and spread throughout the body and quickly repair the body. The remaining energy would have nowhere to go and cause the body to explode. After using the God's Seal, the process was to implant the regenerative cells, the cells would repair the body, and the regenerative cells would be sealed. The fission factors would lose their energy supply and wither to death. The problem was solved perfectly. Let's go, let's go, let's go. Heath was a person with strong mobility. After he had established his train of thought, he began to carry out concrete actions. He opened the cage and took out a white mouse. Then, he took out runic pens, beast blood, and other items and began to draw the runes and magic arrays of the God's Seal on the white mouse. After using it for 2 years, he was now very familiar with the God's Seal. He had also done a lot of research during this time. Now, apart from spells, he could also use magic arrays and even potions to achieve it. Soon, the white mouse's body was covered with dense runes, and a complete God's Seal had been formed. Then, Heath took out the original liquid of regenerating cells that he had prepared in advance and injected all the original cells into the white mouse through a syringe. As soon as the cells were injected, the muscles of the mouse's body began to tremble and distort irregularly. However, at the same time, the runes on its body began to light up, and an invisible force began to absorb the regenerating cells. However, the speed of the seal was not as fast as the rate of cell proliferation. After twisting for a while, the mouse let out a painful scream. Squeak! Then, its body expanded and exploded with a bang. Blood and pieces of flesh splattered everywhere in the barrier that Heath had set up beforehand. Reduce the number of regenerated cells and try to increase the strength of the God Seal again. Heath was not discouraged. He immediately took out a second white mouse and started the experiment. This time, the white mouse was safe and sound, but the regenerated cells did not work. Too few of the original number of cells could not be divided at all and died. Then there was a third, a fourth, a fifth. Heath took out one white mouse after another from the cage, and then failed again and again. There were many reasons for the failure. There were too many cells that could not be sealed, the sealing power was too strong, the cells could not be used, the sealing spell could not locate every cell, the cell proliferation was not good, and so on. This was the case for Wizard's experiments. There were very few cases where they could succeed in one go. Even if they had determined the direction and knew that the idea was correct, there were still a lot of numbers that needed to be fumbled and searched for in practice. These could only be accumulated through repeated experiments. No matter how brilliant a wizard was, even if he was a stigmata wizard, even if he was a heavenly king, he could only follow this procedure. There was no shortcut. Patience was a necessary professional quality for every outstanding wizard. Many young wizards clearly had extremely high talent, but they were always unable to achieve results in spells. A large part of it was because they lacked patience. After failing a few times, they lost interest. Fortunately, Heath, who had lived 2 lifetimes, had already honed his mental fortitude in this aspect. Compared to the difficulties in his previous life's work, the difficulties and failures in front of him were child's play. Failure after failure, the sudden death of mice one after another, followed by the sudden death of cages and cages of mice. Heath felt that if this was in the game, he might be able to get the titles of Rat Killer and Rat Exterminator. This was much more domineering than Dawn Sword God. The failure continued, and the success was slowly approaching. Half a month later. It's finally done. Heath let out a sigh of relief and rubbed his temples. After half a month of continuous hard work and the dedication of countless mice, the amount of work was really shocking. However, the results were also very gratifying. Heath lowered his head and looked at the back of his hand. At this moment, there was a strange pattern on the back of his hand. It looked like a special tattoo. Different from the invisible God seal that sealed one's strength, these kinds of sealed cells would leave an overt seal. So, after thinking, Heath sealed the regenerative cells on his arm. Firstly, it would not affect the appearance of his arm to the greatest extent. Secondly, if there was a problem, he could quickly cut off his arm to protect his body to the greatest extent. As for the tattoo problem, he would think of a way to solve it later. Heath himself did not like to leave any marks on his skin. Picking up the dagger, Heath opened up an inch-long wound in his palm. His skin and flesh flew up and down. It was very frightening. If he was on Blue Star, it would take him a few months to recover from such an injury. Even if he was cured, it would still leave a permanent scar. Even if he used the healing technique, it would take him a few minutes to recover. However, at this moment, Heath only had a thought. He unsealed the seal and released a portion of the regenerative cells. In just a few breaths, his arm had recovered to its original state. Not even a single scar was left. Heath raised his palm and flipped it over and over in front of his eyes. The more he looked, the more satisfied he became. Ha, with such a powerful regenerative ability, as long as it isn't a fatal blow, I can recover. It's equivalent to having an immortal body. After that, Heath named this spell, Regeneration. The day after he finished the regeneration spell, Heath set off to the city, preparing to buy some supplies to head to the magic bug forest. Unexpectedly, when he arrived here, he happened to run into a major event. The first prince of the kingdom of Navi, the original legal first-in-line heir to the throne, had returned. With troops. Chapter 115, Observe. When the alarm bell rang in the city, Heath was buying salt and spices for travel in front of a grocery store. During the long journey, he would often hunt some game on the spot. Without these spices, the taste would not be good. Then, the alarm bell rang. Dong! 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 The urgent sound echoed above the entire city. Heath looked towards the tower. His superior vision allowed him to clearly see that on the tall tower, the scout was frantically pulling the firing pin. His pair of eyes were fixated on the direction outside the city gate. His expression was filled with fear and unease. Day, day, day. Following that was the sound of hurried footsteps. Groups of soldiers rushed out from the barracks on all four sides and rushed up the city wall in a panic. The entire city suddenly became nervous. What happened? Could it be that there are enemies? Why are all the soldiers on the city walls? Could it be that there's going to be a war? The civilians did not understand what had happened, but the horn of war had already sounded. Along with the low sound of the horn, there was also the strong sound of rushing wind. Huge boulders flew towards the city in an arc in the sky. They crossed the city tower and flew towards the city. Then, they crashed down. Rumble. With a loud rumble, the huge boulders crashed into the city. A small white building that was 2 stories tall was instantly smashed into ruins. A mother and child who did not have time to escape were instantly crushed under the broken bricks and tiles. The 6-year-old child was fine under the protection of his mother. He stared blankly at the front with his big eyes as if he had been scared silly. The pedestrians on the street were also stunned at this moment. The noise, footsteps, and discussion stopped abruptly at this moment. It was as if they had been hit by a time-stop spell. Only the people who kept looking left and right with increasingly frightened eyes could tell that this was not a forbidden scene. A few seconds later, the child opened his mouth wide and raised his head to cry, "Wah!" Along with this cry, the street instantly exploded. They're fighting! They're fighting! The first prince and his men are fighting! Everyone, run for your lives! Sob, sob, sob! Mom! Screams, sounds of running for their lives, cries, all sorts of sounds rang out. The citizens who had fallen into panic ran back and forth, running in all directions. In addition to the huge rocks that kept whistling over their heads, the entire world seemed to have come to an end. Sob, sob, sob! Someone help me save my mother! Run, child, quickly hide! Under the first house that had been hit, the mother's leg was pressed down by a collapsed beam. The child beside her cried as he tried his best to push away the beam and dig out his mother. However, his strength was too weak. No matter how hard he tried, he could not push the beam at all. He tried to call for help from the pedestrians on the road, but at this time, everyone was busy running for their lives. Who would care about helping others? The child was so anxious that he cried. He could only continue to make futile efforts. Click! At this moment, there was a soft sound. A young man appeared beside the child. He pulled up the beam with one hand and lifted it up. The child's mother was able to run out from below. The woman first made sure that her child was all right. Then, she repeatedly kowtowed to the man to thank him. Heath shook his head. "You're welcome." The woman left with the child. Heath immediately put down the beam. There was no special reason to save them. It was just a casual act, just like passing by and finding 2 kittens in the flower bed, and he happened to have a ham sausage that he could not eat and threw it over. Then, Heath walked forward. Since he happened to catch up, he would go and see what the 2 sides' identities were and how the battlefield was going. Probably because he had extracted the military elements of Count Croya, Heath became interested in this medieval battlefield. He could also extract some attributes at the same time. Among the people who were fleeing frantically like ants, Heath, who was leisurely heading towards the city gate, obviously did not fit in. Therefore, after walking for a while, he decisively entered stealth mode. Relying on his stealth and night level skills, he easily arrived at the top of the city tower, the first line of the battlefield. At this moment, the war had already reached its climax. Release the arrows! Release the arrows! Shoo! 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 Draw your sword! Fight! Pu! 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 Arrows and boulders flew above his head, and the commander raised his cross-shaped sword high up and waved it back and forth. The sounds of killing, weapons clashing, sharp blades cutting into flesh, and messy footsteps rang out in all sorts of voices. Rows of soldiers were fighting on the battlements. Blood splattered and flames soared into the sky. There were people falling down all the time. In front of a meat grinder like war, human lives seemed extraordinarily cheap. Heath, who was standing in the corner in an invisible manner, could not help but have a strange feeling in his heart when he saw this scene. Such a grand scene should be absolutely terrifying to a modern person like him who grew up in a peaceful era. Theoretically speaking, he should have been trembling with fear a long time ago. Looking back at the time when he first came to this world, the first time he raised his sword and stood on the battlements to fight against the beast tide, he was indeed trembling with fear. Because of this, he was even ridiculed by Kayla. However, now that he was facing a war that was more than 10 times more intense than before, he did not feel any fear at all. Was it because he had experienced too much? In the past, he had participated in wars, and he had even commanded at the last minute. Was he already used to it? No, that was not right. How could anyone get used to war? In the end, it was actually because he was strong. The extraordinary power brought by magic allowed him to cope with the rain of bullets. No boulders, swords, or arrows could hurt him. How could humans be afraid of a war between two nests of ants? It was the same for wizards. In Heath's eyes, this kind of human war was no different from two nests of ants fighting each other. This was the benefit of power. If he did not have power, then he could only run, pray, and shout like the ordinary civilians below the city wall. With power, even if he went to the battlefield, he could be a bystander as if he was watching a show. If that was the power of an apprentice, then what about the power of a wizard? And what about that powerful existence that stood above wizards and looked down on all living things? While he was silently looking forward to the future, Heath knelt down in front of a soldier who had just died. Extract. Beep, extraction successful. Soul energy +2. The war ended that evening. The nobles who supported the first prince's faction in the city took over the city gate and opened it. The first prince personally led his men to kill his way in and defeated the new king's biggest supporter, Count Robertson, in front of the Arc de Triomphe. The new king, who had just ascended the throne, was tied up in front of the first prince. The man who had been sitting on the throne and giving orders yesterday was crying and kneeling at the feet of the first prince, begging for his brother's forgiveness. The latter decisively chopped off his head. Carrying the title of King Slayer, the first prince picked up the blood-stained crown from the ground and put it on his head. "Your Majesty! Your Majesty!" All the officials knelt down and kowtowed. The man laughed loudly as he walked towards the palace, leaving behind corpses all over the ground. Not long after, 2 soldiers came to the crowd and pasted a notice. Recruiting 2 corpse collectors 3 silver coins a day. Chapter 116, Encryption. Forest Manor, Heath Laboratory. On a long wooden table, there was a decapitated body of a young man. The body was on one side, and the head was on the other. It was the king of the Navi kingdom who had just ascended the throne, the second prince, Ishi. Looking at the body on the table, Heath could not help but sigh. He did not expect that just like his father, who had just been carried a few days ago, he would carry the son here a few days later. Should he say that the world was unpredictable, or should he say that the power of a king was too much? As his thoughts ran wild, Heath put his head together with the corpse. Then, he placed a hand on the corpse's shoulder and said, "Extract." Beep, successful extraction. Obtained Virgin's seduction technique. Beep, successful extraction. Soul energy +3. Beep, successful extraction. Obtained King's heart. Damn, again. What was this King's heart used for? Although the Virgin's seduction technique in the beginning was equally baffling, there was indeed knowledge surging into his mind. It was a secret technique used by some holy maidens. But the King's heart? In the end, Heath couldn't feel anything at all. From the literal meaning, the King's aura and King's heart should belong to an invisible temperament and ambition. It was a special substance similar to talent and elemental affinity. Whether it was talent or elemental affinity, Heath could feel substantial changes after extracting it. He could feel that his cultivation had become easier and it was easier to use the elements. However, Heath could not feel the slightest change in his body after extracting the king thing twice in a row. What on earth is it? With doubts in his heart, Heath closed his eyes and sank into his spiritual sea to carefully observe. And with this one look, he really saw something. In his spiritual sea, there were 2 clusters of unfamiliar information floating. They were the so-called King's aura and King's heart. It seemed that there were some useless knowledge points inside, teaching people how to cultivate their character, how to run their family, how to rule the world, and so on. But after careful observation, Heath found that this was only on the surface. In fact, there seemed to be something hidden under these words. The pictographic metaphor was like an encrypted document. What was underneath? There seemed to be a part of the information missing. Heath pondered for a long time but could not find any clues, so he could only put it aside for the time being. To separate a bunch of encrypted information and hand it over to the mortals, who was the one who did all this? Was it the beginning of the blood source? Then what was their purpose for doing all this? In addition, with the king's aura and king's heart, where was the remaining part? Heath thought in puzzlement. At the same time, in the palace of the city of Kalaru, the new king of the kingdom of Navi, the first prince, Mark, was lying on the throne with 2 buttons ripped open on his collar. The crown was worn askew on his head, and the bloodstains on it had been wiped clean, shining brightly under the flickering light of the fire. The accompanying soldiers and knights sat on both sides of the hall. On the low table in front of them were cooked meat, sweet wine, and other delicacies. Everyone ate and drank together, while watching the music and dancing in the middle of the hall. The beautiful music played by the violin and cello echoed in the hall, and the dancers danced to the beautiful music. The graceful figure and graceful dance caused the knights in the hall to whistle continuously. A few lechers simply put down the roast meat in their hands and rushed to the center of the dance floor to dance with the dancers. When they were in the mood to dance, they even tore off the dancers' clothes with their greasy hands. It was hard to believe that such a rude and lewd scene would happen at the banquet of the king of a country. Even a banquet of a third-rate aristocrat would not be so absurd. However, His Majesty the King, who was supposed to be in charge of ethics, only laughed out loud at this moment. He had no intention of reprimanding the other party at all. The first prince of the kingdom of Navi, Mark, had a wild nature and was not taught etiquette. Therefore, after he became an adult, he was assigned by the old king to guard the northern wilderness, which was filled with barbarians. He had wanted to make him change and realize the meaning of civilization, but he did not expect that the barbarity of the wilderness did not wake him up. Instead, it made him feel that this kind of life was not bad. There was even a group of people around him who tasted the same. Everyone ate meat, drank wine, and played with women together every day. They had long been used to it. Day. 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 At this moment, a series of footsteps sounded. The kingdom's grand secretary, Tours, walked into the hall. This lewd scene in the hall clearly made the grand secretary unhappy. He walked to the front and bowed to Mark on the throne. Your Majesty, forgive me for being blunt, but you shouldn't be like this. Mark smiled as if nothing had happened. Tours, are you going to lecture me on behalf of my dead father? The grand secretary, Tours, said earnestly, we just hope that you can become a wise king and bring etiquette and enlightenment to your people. The wizards also hope so. The brothers had already surrendered, yet he still beheaded the other party in public, and put on the crown without waiting for the priest to crown him. These were already very inconsistent with the rules. Etiquette? Enlightenment? Mark sneered. He pointed at the crown on his head and said, I'm sitting here and wearing this because of the sword in my hand, because of the bravery of my brothers, and not because of your so-called etiquette and enlightenment. One of those who talked about those things has already been buried in the ground, and the other has just had his head chopped off by me. As for wizards? Do you think I still don't know what happened? Those old monsters are too busy to take care of themselves. I'm in charge here. His words were full of contempt and disdain. Tours frowned. That's exactly why. Mark waved his hand to stop him from continuing. Okay, I didn't ask you to come here to listen to your lecture. Tell me, how is the matter with that bastard Robertson coming along? How dare he send troops to help his retarded younger brother fight for the throne with him? Until now, Mark was still full of anger. Tours said, the sons of the Count of Black Mountain have all been controlled. We plan to let the fourth son, Bane, take over the position of Count. This child has already sworn that you are the only king and will be loyal to you. Let his fourth son take over the position of Count. Before Tours could finish, Mark interrupted, I never remember giving such an order. Tours was stunned and explained, Bane is the weakest of the sons. His own strength is only that of an apprentice knight. Of course, if you are not satisfied, the second son of the Count of Black Mountain. Mark interrupted again, no, no, no. You don't understand. This is not a question of which son. The traitor just shot an arrow at me on the city wall. In order to chop off his head, I lost 600 brothers. Why should I let his son inherit a large piece of land? Tours frowned. Your Majesty, Count Robertson fights for the king. This is in accordance with the rules. You cannot deprive his son of the right to inherit. Otherwise, the nobles will target you. No matter what underhanded methods Ishi used, he was still legally on the throne. Mark looked incredulous. Rebellion is in accordance with the rules. He held his head and said to the knights in front of the hall, listen to what this old guy is saying. Did he get F'd by a woman last night? Laughter and ridicule came from the hall. Mark asked the maid next to him to pour a glass of wine. He took the glass and left the throne and walked to Tours. He pointed at Tours' face and said, I'll tell you what the rules are. The rules are who has the sharpest sword and who has more brothers. I've never sat on this throne by some bullshit rules. I've relied on my brothers and my sword. He drank the wine and continued, let me tell you what to do. Kill all of Robertson's sons, send his daughter and wife to me and my brothers, and then my soldiers. Tours said anxiously, nobles. Mark interrupted, to hell with the bullshit nobles. To hell with the bullshit rules. There is only one rule in this land, and that is my rules. I, Mark, am the biggest rule here. He said arrogantly, if those aristocrats are obedient, then let them live in peace. If anyone is unhappy and wants to talk to me about those so-called rules, then I will chop off his head and cook his whole family. Let him know what the rules are. When he said this, Mark seemed to choke, and his throat felt uncomfortable. He coughed, cough. Let him know what the rules are. Before he finished his words, his face suddenly changed. As if he couldn't breathe, his face suddenly turned dark red, and a layer of purplish-red spots covered his face. Your Majesty? Your Majesty? What happened to you? Your Majesty? Ah! Someone come quickly! His Majesty has been poisoned! In an instant, the hall was in chaos. Mark fell to the ground, and blood spurted out of his mouth and nose. His eyes were wide open, and his mouth was still trembling, as if he was still saying something. He said it as if. Rules. A few days later, in the Forest Manor. Heath looked at the young king lying on the table with a strange expression. He had been guessing whether the rest of the information would be on the first prince, but before he could think of a reason, this guy had taken the initiative to lie on his experimental table. Could it be that his luck was too good? Heath could not help but exclaim, no wonder the ancients paid attention to luck. Even a pig can really take off when standing in the wind. Such luck was both his luck and his power. In such an era, war and chaos were inevitable. It was normal for a father to die today and a son to die tomorrow. While sighing in his heart, Heath placed a hand on Mark's left shoulder. Beep, extraction successful. Obtained heavy cross /. Beep, extraction successful. Soul energy +2. Beep, extraction successful. Obtained King's Soul. As if to verify Heath's previous guess, a few crisp notifications sounded in his ears, and the missing information was completed at this moment. At the same time, Heath successfully uncovered the hidden veil under the information. Chapter 117, Poet. The beginning of Blood Source. I didn't expect it to be the beginning of Blood Source. In the laboratory, Heath was pleasantly surprised. After the three pieces of information were put together, he was able to analyze the beginning of Blood Source. Most wizard organizations in the wizard world, including Shadow Tower, had some secret spells that they kept hidden. Some wizard organizations would name their wizard organizations after these secret spells, such as the beginning of Blood Source and Red Devil's Blood. I see. Is it to purify the impurities of spiritual power? This secret spell is indeed qualified to be a treasure of the tower. From the information analyzed, the beginning of Blood Source was not a battle spell, but a spell to assist in training. Its purpose was to purify the impurities of spiritual power. Don't think that this spell was worthless just because it was a support spell. On the contrary, its value was no less than an official spell. Purifying the impurities in one's spiritual power is one of the inevitable important steps for an apprentice to advance to a wizard. The first step for an apprentice to advance to a wizard was to purify the impurities in one's spiritual power to increase the purity of one's spiritual power. The higher the purity of one's spiritual power, the higher the success rate of advancing to a wizard. And the spell, the beginning of Blood Source, could bring a 30% increase in the purity of one's spiritual power. Although 30% purity of spiritual power did not mean a 30% increase in the success rate of advancing to a wizard, it was still a huge increase in the success rate of advancing to a wizard. This saves me a lot of trouble. After 2 years of unremitting efforts, Heath's mind power had already entered the advanced apprentice stage, and he was not far from the peak. Once he reached the peak, he would be able to make a breakthrough to become an official wizard. Originally, Heath had been planning to start preparing materials to advance to a wizard after he returned from the magic bug forest. Purifying his spiritual power was one of his plans. Now that he had the beginning of blood source, not only did it save him a lot of effort, it also saved him a lot of magic stones. After all, as the last hurdle before becoming a wizard, the materials used to purify one's spiritual power could be described as priceless. Why would blood source hide such a valuable treasure like the foundation of the organization on a human? I heard that some wizard organizations are worried that some secret of the organization will lose their inheritance due to accidents, so they will make a backup of the secret. Could it be that blood source is the same? Heath's guess was indeed correct. The beginning of blood source was the secret spell of the organization. Only the wizard master and the core apprentices of the organization had received the inheritance, which was an absolutely secret spell. However, this involved a problem. Only so few people knew that if there was an accident or a big war like the one now, the whole wizard organization might be wiped out, and blood source would lose its inheritance. In order to prevent such a situation from happening, blood source had made a backup. They divided the spell into several parts and sealed it with ordinary human royal magic, bringing it to the human kingdom under their jurisdiction, which was the kingdom of Navi. Then, with the coronation ceremony of the king and the coming of age ceremony of the prince, the beginning of blood source, which was disguised as the way to rule the country, was forcibly implanted into the minds of the king and the adult prince through special spells, thus forming a backup of the spell. Every time the king died and the prince came of age, the spell would be resealed and re-implanted. This was actually a very safe plan. The sealed information was forcibly implanted into the minds of the king and his son through a spell. Since the king and the prince did not know what this was exactly, of course, it was impossible to leak the secret. Including the fact that to extract it from the source of blood, a special ceremony had to be held. Only the blood source organization knew about this ceremony, and the possibility of it being leaked was almost zero. However, who would have thought that there would be such a special ability like Heath in this world that it could be directly extracted? Wait until I return from Magic Bug Forest to start purifying the spiritual force. It's time to prepare for advancing to a wizard. Heisman silently decided. The chaos in the kingdom of Navi did not end with the death of the first prince Mark. On the contrary, the death of the new king was the beginning of the chaos. After the death of the first prince, the third son of the old king, a baby, was pushed onto the throne. Then the nobles who supported them began to purge the nobles of the first prince's faction. However, this purge was met with stubborn resistance from the nobles of the first prince's faction. The infant who had just ascended the throne for less than 2 days was driven out of the throne. Then, the nobles from the northern wilderness supported one of the nephews of the old king to become the new king. This kind of inappropriate behavior instantly set off an explosion in the kingdom of Navi. All the nobles refused to pledge their loyalty to the imperial city. As a result, a chaotic situation appeared. Some nobles began to attack the imperial city. Some nobles waited for an opportunity to seize someone else's territory. The nobles attacked the king. The nobles attacked other nobles. They ambushed and poisoned them. There were countless plots and tricks. Everyone no longer talked about rules or morals. They killed and assassinated. They used all kinds of despicable methods. The entire kingdom of Navi was instantly thrown into chaos. And the kingdom of Navi was only a reflection of the chaotic era. Shirin, Jed, Vera, Riker, the 16 kingdoms at the edge of the forest, and even more kingdoms. After losing the restrictions of the wizards, the most primitive desires of mankind were completely unleashed. They attacked and killed each other. The nobles fought the nobles fought the kingdoms fought the kingdoms, and the kingdoms fought the nobles. All kinds of wars broke out everywhere. The flames of war swept through every corner of this land. The ethical principles and rules and order were no longer there. The chaotic era quietly came. On the second day after the first prince's purge and being purged, Heath did not delay any further and set off for Magic Bug Forest. In such a chaotic era, people were dying everywhere. There was no end to the extraction. There had to be a priority. It was better to go and sweep Magic Bug Forest first. No matter what, the improvement in strength still had to come first. Before he left, he went to the city of Kalaru. Last time, he had bought half of the things and started fighting. Some things had not been bought yet. Compared to when he had just arrived in the city, the changes here were obviously very shocking. The streets had become dilapidated. Broken bricks, broken arrows, and stones were scattered on the streets. There were collapsed houses everywhere, leaving only ruins. Homeless vagrants were sleeping on the street, and some of them had even turned into smelly corpses. There were very few people on the street. Occasionally, they would see a few people who were in a hurry, looking anxious and uneasy. They were constantly alert to the strangers around them. In an era where order was lost, robbery had become a common occurrence. In front of a section of the collapsed city wall, there sat a bard. His beard was unkempt, his clothes were full of dirt, and the feathers in his hat were stained with blood. He was holding a three-stringed zither in his arms. As he played the harp, he chanted in a desolate tone. The son kills the father, the brother kills the brother, and the crown stained with blood will not forgive anyone. Poisoned wine, bought assassins, used all kinds of despicable tricks. The king no longer governs his country, and the nobles no longer offer their loyalty. Blood-stained swords, neighing horses, everyone is attacking each other. The gentleman tradition is abandoned, the despicable villain is respected. Everyone no longer talks about morality, no longer talks about rules. I kill you, you kill me, who chopped off whose head? You kill me, I kill you, let's see who can endure to the end. Let's see, who can endure to the end. Chapter 118, Grey Wizard. Magic Bug Forest was a resource area located in the southeast part of the Underdark Treesia. It had an area of more than 300 square kilometers. As the name suggested, it was mainly made up of insect-type demonized creatures. There were all kinds of strange demonized bugs living in it. A few days later, at dusk, in a small forest about 10 miles away from Magic Bug Forest. Creak! Creak! The sound of boots stepping on the soft road made of piles of debris was crisp. On the rugged forest path, a figure was walking slowly. His entire body was covered by a white and large black cloak, and a black cross sword was slung across his waist. His signature black hair swayed in the wind. It was Heath. As he walked forward, Heath observed his surroundings with a wary expression. In the past few years in Shadow Tower, he had basically explored all the resource areas under the control of Shadow Tower. He had never been to the Magic Bug Forest. The reason why he did not come was not only because this place was far from Shadowland, but also because it was more dangerous. The demonized insects here were nurtured by a wizard in Shadow Tower who specialized in the research of demonized insects. There were many types and numbers, and their strength was not low. Rashly entering would be life-threatening. It was a red area worthy of its name. In the past, the missions related to this place in the tower were only open to intermediate and advanced apprentices. From this, one could see how dangerous this place was. Rustle. After walking for a while, suddenly, there was a soft sound in front of them, and the bushes in front of them swayed. Heath put one hand on the cross-shaped sword at his waist, and the magic power in his body also began to move. But at this time, a similar spiritual wave was transmitted over from that side. The gentle wave was clearly sending a friendly signal to him. There's an apprentice. Heath was stunned. Shadow Tower had already lost the ownership of Magic Bug Forest. The forest guardians here should have been removed by Shadow Tower long ago. Soon, a young figure walked out from the bushes, with a fist-sized flying bug on his shoulder. It was a male apprentice in his 20s. He wore a grey cloak, and the curved wooden staff emblem on the upper right corner explained its origin, Grey Wizard. The so-called Grey Wizard referred to free wizards who did not belong to any specific wizard organization. They did not belong to any wizard organization, nor did they work for any organization. They were free and active in various places. Heath could not help but raise his guard. Grey wizards were not necessarily a group that was easy to deal with. Freedom also meant that there were no restrictions and no need to consider any rules and regulations. Think about how these people would do things. Although they were not as crazy as the dark wizards, most of them were not that clean. The difference between them and the dark wizards was that one was legal and the other was illegal. In fact, many dark wizards were evolved from grey wizards. Sensing the wariness on Heath's face, the apprentice quickly put on a smile and greeted him, "Apprentice Heath, don't be nervous. I have no ill intentions." Heath raised his eyebrows. "You know me." He could not remember what kind of dealings he had with the grey wizards. The apprentice laughed and said, "Haha, then you may not know me, but you should know." He took out a cloak and waved it in front of Heath. It was the black cloak of Shadow Tower. Heath asked, "Are you an apprentice of the Shadow Tower?" The apprentice said, "Scion 218, Intermediate Apprentice Marcel. Nice to meet you. You may not know me, but we have actually met in Shadow Tower, haha. After a pause, he added, but now, I am a grey wizard. After leaving Shadow Tower, these apprentices naturally gave up their identity as one from Shadow Tower and automatically became grey wizards. This included Heath, who was also a grey wizard now. After hearing the apprentice's introduction, Heath slightly withdrew his hostility. He had some impression of this apprentice. It seemed that he had heard about him from Ender, Jessica, and the others. It seemed that he was an apprentice of the tower who was very good at sweet talking. It seemed that he had used this opportunity to hook up with an official apprentice, and even got that girl to kick away the other boys around her. Ender and the others commented that he was very good at playing with women. In addition, the heraldry on his apprentice's cloak was specially made by wizards. It was identical to his own spiritual power and the characteristics of the organization, so it could not be fake. Heath said, "Nice to meet you." Marcel said, "Apprentice Heath, you are going in this direction? If I'm not wrong, you are going to Magic Bug Forest to collect materials, right?" Heath nodded. "Yes." Marcel invited, "Then why don't we go together? We're heading towards Magic Bug Forest as well. An extra person on the way will be able to take care of us. What do you think?" Since it had already become an ownerless land, of course anyone could go. Heath asked in puzzlement, "You guys?" Marcel nodded. "They're all grey wizards. They're resting in front. If you agree, I'll bring you there." Heath thought for a moment and said, "Sure." They were all going to collect materials and there was no conflict of interest. There was nothing wrong with forming a team. With his current strength, it did not mean that he was completely safe in Magic Bug Forest. Although grey wizards were not very clean, their brains were still normal. Normally, grey wizards would not do crazy things if there was no conflict of interest. After all, people with a healthy mind would not want to become dark wizards. Marcel left the flying bug on his shoulder and walked forward with Heath. Heath noticed that it was a type of bug called the spotted-tailed flying bug. It was a low-level demonized creature. Because it was easier to raise it, it was often used by wizards as a companion to patrol the surroundings in the wild. Marcel must have used it to sense that he was coming. The two of them walked a few hundred steps forward and came to a small stream. At this moment, there were a few tents by the stream. Around the tents were more than 10 figures. Some were resting with their eyes closed, while others were busy cooking. Heath observed for a moment. Most of them were human knights. There were only 2 real wizards. One was an old man and the other was a cold-faced young man. Both of them had the strength of an advanced apprentice. Marcel led Heath into the room and introduced him to the 2 of them. "This is the friend I met by chance. He's the magic genius of our Shadow Tower, Heath Noen." The old man's gaze swept over Heath in a friendly manner. He nodded and said, "He has the strength of an intermediate apprentice at such a young age. He's worthy of the name of a genius." After a pause, the old man introduced himself. "Grey Wizard of the Northern Kingdom, John Inno." "Nice to meet you." Heath said, "Nice to meet you." As he spoke, Heath reminded himself that the so-called Northern Kingdom referred to a kingdom on the border of the Underdark Tresia. That region was very chaotic. There were always dark wizards roaming around. Among the grey wizards, that region was the least clean. Marcel then introduced the cold-faced man to Heath. "That's an apprentice of Cursed." The man nodded at Heath as a greeting, then closed his eyes and continued to meditate. Marcel said, "It's a little late today. Let's rest here for the night and enter Magic Bug Forest tomorrow morning. Apprentice Heath, what do you think?" Heath said, "Sure." During dinner time, everyone chatted about their purpose of coming. They were all going into Magic Bug Forest to gather materials. As Shadow Tower's high-level resource land, Magic Bug Forest's cultivation of precious resources could naturally be described as a massive amount. These precious resources used to be carefully guarded by Shadow Tower's forest guardians. Outsiders could not get close to them, but now that the Underdark Tresia was in such a mess, Magic Bug Forest naturally became ownerless. John laughed and said, "This is really a good time." The Grey Wizards, to put it nicely, were called free wizards. In fact, they were no different from the homeless vagrants in the city. In the era of sound order, the resource areas all belonged to someone. One should know how difficult it was for stateless people to obtain resources. But now, it was really enough to pick up sacks everywhere. Chaos was the chaos of the light wizards, but it was also the carnival of the grey and dark wizards. After eating the dinner prepared by the knights, everyone returned to their respective tents to meditate. After a silent night, everyone set off the next day. After walking south for about 2 hours, a dense forest appeared in the distance. At this point, the number of insects suddenly increased. There were mosquitoes, ants, cockroaches, spiders, and countless other insects crawling on the ground. The buzzing and squeaking sounds were incessant. At this point, Marcel stopped everyone. Magic Bug Forest is ahead, but there are defensive magic circles and guards left behind by Wizard Parker at the entrances to the forest. Those are enough to defend against official wizards. I suggest that we don't force our way in. Everyone was stunned. Old Man John asked in puzzlement, "How do you know?" Marcel explained, "When I was in Shadow Tower, I took on several missions here. The guards here happen to be apprentices that I know, so I talked to them." The cold-faced man, cursed, looked at Marcel meaningfully and said, "I'll go take a look." With that, he turned into a cloud of smoke and flew straight ahead. Seeing this scene, Heath's eyes could not help but light up. Flying spell. The flying spell was a commonly used spell in the wizard world. The transformation spell was combined with the lightness spell. It was common to turn into a cloud of smoke and fly hundreds of miles in a day. However, most of the flying spells were wizard-level spells. It was rare to see such spells being used during the apprentice period. In half an hourglass's time, Cursed flew back. John went up to him and asked, "How is it?" Cursed said, "He's right. There are magic arrays set up at the nearby entrances and exits." John frowned. This was the magic array left behind by Shadow Tower. Everyone knew how powerful they were in this land. Although the shadow above their heads had disappeared, the shadow they left in people's hearts was not so easy to erase. Marcel suddenly said, "I know which direction the defensive magic array is the weakest. We can break in from there." Everyone was silent for a moment. John asked, "What do you think?" Cursed said, "I don't care." Heath also nodded. "I don't have any objections." John said, "All right, then let's go." Pausing for a moment, he said half-jokingly, "Marcel, our future is in your hands." Marcel said, "Of course." Heath looked at Marcel thoughtfully. It was one thing to know that there was a protective magic array in Magic Bug Forest, but it was also possible to know which protective magic array was problematic. No matter how close to the forest guardian was, he probably did not have the courage to reveal this to him, right? Chapter 119, Set Up. Everyone could see that Marcel was hiding something, but they did not ask in detail. This was how cooperation between Grey Wizards worked. Everyone would have some reservations, and it was impossible to achieve full trust. Soon, everyone arrived at the entrance that Marcel had mentioned. They came to a hillside not far from the entrance. Marcel released the spotted-tailed flying bug and secretly observed the situation at the entrance. At the same time, he took out a crystal ball and used it to project the spotted-tailed flying bug's vision to everyone. This was a dark and damp valley. The valley was covered with large spider webs. Spiders of different sizes stopped on the webs. They looked like an army of spiders. The smaller ones were the size of a fist, and the larger ones were as tall as a person. They were even 2 to 3 meters tall. There were thousands of them densely packed together, making people's scalps go numb. Marcel explained, "The one guarding here is a queen spider and that is the spider army she leads." The cold-faced man frowned. Queen spider. That was a demonized beast that was equivalent to a peak apprentice. It was only a hair's breadth away from becoming an official wizard. Marcel said, "Under normal circumstances, the queen spider would be very dangerous. But now that the queen spider is in the spawning period, her strength will be greatly reduced. If we work together, it shouldn't be a problem." Heath observed for a while and asked, "Can we use fire?" He knew about the queen spider. It was a demonized insect-type creature that lived in the forest. It was cruel by nature and liked to suck the brains of human babies. This creature was very powerful in all aspects. It only lacked resistance to fire and was very vulnerable to fire. Marcel shook his head. In order to guard against fire, Wizard Parker set up many magic arrays around the valley. When someone tries to use fire, these magic arrays will be activated. Heath asked, "Do you know the exact location of the magic array?" Marcel said, "I know a little." He looked at Heath with a strange expression. "Do you want to dismantle the magic array?" The knowledge of magic arrays was not something that an ordinary apprentice would learn. Heath said, "I want to try." John agreed, with the help of the flame, our battle will be much easier. Marcel nodded. All right. Then he took out a map and marked it one by one. The area where I drew the red cross is the area where the magic array is. But most of them are under the control of the spider army and you can't get close. The only ones that can get close are here, here, and here, these few areas. Heath took it over and looked at it. After thinking for a while, Heath quickly circled a few areas on the map. Old John's eyes lit up when he saw where Heath circled. He could not help but ask, could it be that the apprentice Heath is also involved in the human military? The area Heath had circled was suitable for spreading out the battlefield. Before Heath could say anything, Marcel started introducing enthusiastically, I think Apprentice John has heard of the sword wizard from Twilight Fortress, right? John was shocked. He looked Heath up and down. Could it be? Marcel smiled. That's right. This is the black-haired genius of our Shadow Tower. The sword wizard who led 800 human soldiers to defeat the enemy's army of 10,000 undead in Twilight Fortress. The Battle of Twilight Fortress 2 years ago shook the entire Underdark Trezia. All the wizards in this area had more or less heard of the black-haired genius who knew how to use a sword. John seemed to have gotten to know Heath again. So the genius friend that Marcel mentioned is actually a genius like you, sir. I was rude before. This time, even Cursed, who had always been quiet, could not help but look at Heath again. In the wizard world, strength was the most important. John and Cursed were both advanced apprentices. Although they did not say anything yesterday, they actually did not think much of Heath, a middle-level apprentice. Now that they knew Heath's identity, they could not help but look at him in a different light. After all, he was a genius who had such an outstanding record of defeating an advanced apprentice. Heath said politely, Your Excellency also surprised me very much. He had once thought that only a wizard like him would be able to control the army in war. John smiled and said, Humans are better at strategizing. I have a friend who specializes in these things. I drank with her a few times and heard him talk about some things. His name is Campbell. Sir Heath should have heard of him. Heath was surprised. Campbell. There was no need to introduce this name anymore. After the Red Demon War ended 2 years ago, Heath had learned about him. He was basically the most outstanding military strategist of this era. Heath said, Sir's friend is indeed fresh in my memory. If there's a chance, I would like to get to know him. John shook his head. I'm afraid there's no chance. My friend passed away last month. Heath was stunned. What? He said in disappointment, that's really a pity. Probably because he had extracted Count Croya's military knowledge, Heath was also interested in this area of knowledge. From time to time, he would use it to study it. It was a pity that he could not meet such an epic-making military genius. John said, Human life has always been like this. It is short and fragile. If you are not careful, your whole life will pass. Pausing for a moment, he continued, but my friend left some books related to military affairs. If you are interested, we can talk about it after this is over. Heath replied, Sure. Then, everyone began to move. They followed Heath to the places marked with red circles on the map and began to dismantle the magic arrays. In the past 2 years, Heath had extracted a large amount of magic knowledge. In addition, he would read it in detail in his spare time to integrate it. In this aspect, even some wizards were far inferior to Heath. With this powerful knowledge, dismantling the magic arrays was a piece of cake. He easily dismantled the magic arrays. After clearing the empty space, Heath took the initiative and said, If everyone trusts me, then listen to my arrangements and plans. This way, we can win more easily. If it was what Heath said before, it would be good if others did not kick him out. But now that they knew his identity, of course, no one would object. After all, he was a military genius who could fight against 10,000 people with 800 people. John said, We'll leave it to you, sir. Marcel and Cursed also nodded. Heath said, First, I need to set up a magic array here. It will cost at least 20,000 magic stones. This magic array will greatly enhance our chances of winning. If you agree, we will bear the cost together. John said, As long as it is effective, 20,000 magic stones is nothing. Marcel and Cursed nodded in agreement. Compared to the massive amount of precious materials in Magic Bug Forest, 20,000 magic stones was nothing. Soon, Heath had set up the Hellfire Sea on the battlefield he had chosen. It was an empty space at the right end of the valley. It was surrounded by mountains, and there was only a narrow passage in front of it. Heath explained, "The others are ready. Now, we just need to attract the spider army into this place. Once they all enter, we'll block their escape route. The rest will be left to magic." Kirst volunteered, "If we just need to lure them here, just leave this to me." No one was more suitable for this job than him, who had mastered flight. John said, "In that case, I should show some sincerity." As he spoke, he took out a horn and handed it to a knight beside him. The knight took the horn and blew it forcefully. Immediately, there was a loud rumble, and the ground shook. The surrounding rocks rolled together naturally, quickly forming 2-meter-tall stone giants. In a moment, an army of stone men was formed. John said, "These 200 stone men are under your command. Whatever you need them to do, just give the order to the knights." After a pause, he added, "But they can only last for 30 minutes. You need to pay attention." Heath said, "More than enough." This surprised him. He did not expect the old man to have such a good thing. Then, he commanded the stone men. After everything was arranged, he said to Kirst, "Lure them over." After receiving the order, Kirst quickly went over. About half an hour's time. Suddenly, there was a tremor on the ground, followed by a flurry of footsteps that came from afar. The tremors became more and more intense, and the footsteps also became louder and louder. A moment later, a mass of black fog rushed into the valley. Following closely behind, a densely packed spider army surged into the valley, shoulder to shoulder, legs to legs. It was densely packed, uncountable, and it was as terrifying as the tide. Clang! Heath pulled out his cross-shaped sword. Prepare for battle. Chapter 120, Fierce Battle. Tens of thousands of spider soldiers rushed over like a flood that had broken through a dike and rushed into the valley. They were accompanied by rolling sand and stones and towering dust. For a moment, their momentum was shocking. Facing the spider army that was rushing over, Heath and the rest were also in formation and ready to deal with it. 200 stone men, whose comprehensive attributes were no less than that of apprentice knights, were divided into 2 parts by Heath. One part was divided into 50 and arranged to lie in ambush on both sides of the entrance of the valley. The remaining 150 stone men stood in a row in front of the formation, as if a city wall had been erected in front of them. Behind them were more than 10 official knights. Each of them held a longbow that was drawn to a full moon. Archery was a compulsory course for every knight, and knights did not only know how to use swords. Behind the knights were Heath and the other 4 apprentice wizards. Other than Heath, the other 3 had already taken out their respective wizard tools. John and Marcel had long-handled staffs, while Kirst was left with a thick book. 800 steps. 500 steps. 300 steps. Prepare the bows and arrows. Release the arrows. With Heath's order, the knights released the bowstrings in their hands. The arrows tied with potion bottles and low-level scrolls shot into the sky, and then fell diagonally into the sea of spiders. Boom! 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 The one-time magic tool tied to the shaft of the arrow was activated. In an instant, clusters of flames exploded, and hundreds of spiders were instantly swallowed by the flames. Squeak! The death of their companions aroused the ferocity of the group of monsters. They let out ear-piercing squeaks and their slender spider legs moved quickly. Their originally fierce speed suddenly increased by a large margin. Release the arrows! Release the arrows! Release the arrows! The arrows were shot into the group of spiders one after another under Heath's command. After 3 rounds of volleys, the spider army had already closed in on them by 50 steps. At this distance, there was no longer any point in continuing the volley of arrows. Heath decisively gave the order. Draw your swords! Clang! Clang! A cold metallic sound rang out as bright cross swords were raised into the air one after another. At the same time, the 150 stone men lowered their bodies and spread out their fists on both sides. Their large, irregular mouths opened up from top to bottom and let out earth-shattering roars. Roar! Boom! A loud sound rang out. The torrent of spiders crashed into the giant city wall. The powerful impact instantly caused the spiders in the front row to explode. The flying flesh and spider remains formed a terrifying rain of corpses in the sky. However, very soon, the spider army at the back stepped on the corpses of their comrades and bathed in the blood of their comrades as they rushed forward to engage in a fierce battle with the stone giants. Clang! Clang! The spider's sharp forelimbs waved repeatedly, slashing at the hard body of the stone men. The attacks of countless blades immediately left scars on the body of the stone men, and gravel flew everywhere. But at the same time, the stone men also began to fight back. Large fists were hammered down, one by one, or even several. Wherever the fists landed, the spiders were all smashed into meat paste. On the other side, the wizards and knights in the back row also began to move. The knights stood behind the stone men as the second line of defense against the spider army. They fought with the spiders that passed by the stone men. The remaining wizards raised their staffs and chanted spells to cast spells one by one. John and Cursed both cast fire spells, fireball and summon flame. Fire spells were very useful in daily life. Wizards with or without affinity in this area would mostly learn some low-level spells. The remaining Marcel did not seem to have learned any fire spells. At this time, he was summoning thorns to block the spider's way. These giant trees with thorns were very useful in this kind of group battle. There was no need to take the initiative to attack the enemy. The spiders would crash into them and their bodies would explode from the sharp parts. This kind of battle continued for a few minutes. The spider army had already charged into the valley. Seeing that the situation was almost over, Heath decisively ordered, "Close the road." The knight in charge of issuing the order raised his stone horn and blew it. The stone men that had been lying in ambush on both sides of the valley suddenly rushed out and blocked the entrance of the valley. At the same time, Heath raised his hand, and the long necromancer's staff was already in his hand. He raised the necromancer's staff high and chanted an obscure incantation. As the incantation was chanted, the fire elements in the air rose. Everyone present felt a surge of high temperature rapidly forming. As demonized creatures that were especially sensitive to elements, they had already sensed the abnormality of the elements in the space. Their biological instincts caused the spiders to show fear. Some of them even ignored the queen's order and began to flee in panic. The formation became chaotic. Ah! At this moment, a high-pitched screech was heard from the spider army. A giant creature suddenly appeared. It was a giant spider that was about 5 meters long. The upper half of its body was that of a half-naked human female. The lower half of its body was that of a spider. Its 2 arms were simply 2 sharp blades. It was the leader of the spider army, the queen spider. Sensing the danger, the queen spider immediately locked onto the source of the danger, Heath. Its huge body rose and fell in her spider army, waving its 2 long arms as it attacked Heath. At this moment, the spell had just been activated, and the spell's protective shield had yet to be activated. If he was hit, Heath's mortal body would not be able to withstand it. He was about to summon the mimicry shield to protect himself, but at this moment, someone was in front of him and blocked his way. It was one of his teammates, Cursed. The magic book in Cursed's hand was open to both sides. A large number of vines flew out from the book and interweaved into a rattan shield in the air, blocking the queen spider's path. The queen spider's sharp blade was just right to counter such a tough plant. Cursed said to Heath, "Concentrate on reading your spell. Leave this to me." Heath looked at him in surprise. This silent grey wizard was more reliable than he had expected. The spell continued to be chanted. As the chant entered the middle section, the protective barrier was activated. The large hexagram magic circle covering the entire valley appeared under everyone's feet, followed by the scorching flames. After finishing the last rune, Heath shouted, "Retreat!" The 3 wizards and 10 knights gathered around threw away the battle in front of them and immediately moved closer to Heath, hiding inside the protective barrier. The moment everyone hid inside, the flames that covered the entire magic array soared into the sky. Countless fireballs and fire dragons spread out and swept across the entire valley, instantly turning the valley into a sea of fire. When the people hiding inside the magic array saw this terrifying scene, they could not help but feel a chill in their hearts. Such a powerful spell was already far beyond what an apprentice could grasp. If the target of this spell was themselves, no one on the scene would have the confidence to withstand it. 10 minutes later. At this moment, the noise in the valley had already stopped. The entire valley was silent. Only the sound of burning firewood exploding echoed from time to time. Charred corpses littered the valley. The smaller spiders were directly vaporized, while the larger ones had their flesh and bones burnt away. It was a spectacular sight to behold. Standing in front of them was the queen spider, the leader of the spider army. Similarly, she had also been charred to a crisp. Even a monster like Grice was unable to defend against the hellfire sea. It was even more impossible for a mere high-level demonized creature to survive under it. If not for Heath intentionally controlling the temperature to remove the flames in this region after confirming that the queen spider's life had ended, the queen spider would probably only be left with a skeleton now. The integrity of the corpse was directly related to the amount of material extracted. Glancing at the strange corpse of the half-human, half-spider, Heath stepped forward and placed a hand on its body. Extract. Chapter 121, Tracking. Beep, extraction successful. Spiritual power plus 0.1. Beep, extraction successful. Innate knowledge, nurture of venom. Nurture of venom? What was that? The system notification stunned Heath for a moment. This was the first time he had seen such an extraction. He quickly focused his attention on the information that had just entered his head. When he saw it, he was shocked. There were three main aspects to the strength of a demonized creature like the queen spider. First, it had very strong spiritual power and could directly control its spawns. Second, it had very strong close combat abilities due to its high attributes. Third, it had poison. Every queen spider was an expert in using poison and could use extremely strong poison. Once it was hit, even a strong creature with dozens of physiques would not be able to resist it. Some of the targeted poison was even a headache for wizards. It was just that Heath's Hellfire Sea had come too suddenly. The queen spider did not even have the chance to use her poison before it was burned to death. It did not even have the chance to show itself. And what Heath had just extracted was the queen spider's talent in using poison. This thing can be extracted. Heath was surprised. This thing was completely like a creature's unique instinct. For it to be able to be extracted directly by him was not just ridiculous. First, it's the king's heart, and now it's the talent of a demonized creature. Why do I feel that the things I've extracted recently are getting stranger and stranger? Why couldn't I extract them in the past? This was not the first time Heath had such a thought. Recently, he found that the system had become a little strange. It seemed that it had extracted more things than before, and the types of things it extracted had become more complex. It was especially obvious when he was collecting corpses in the city. He could even extract some messy knowledge from ordinary people. Although these things had existed in the past, the frequency was definitely not as high as it was now. Overall, it gave him the feeling that the extraction function had been enhanced. Is it because I advanced to an advanced apprentice? During this period of time, Heath had not changed much. The biggest change was that he advanced to an advanced apprentice a few months ago. If the system had really changed, he felt that this was probably the only reason. Of course, whether this was the case or not remained to be seen. John looked at the scorched ground around him and exclaimed, "Tisk, tisk, tisk. What a terrifying spell. Its power should be comparable to an official level spell." Heath replied truthfully, "It's still a little lacking." Although the Hellfire Sea looked vast, it had not formed a complete system. It could not be compared to a real wizard level spell. John said, "Even so, this kind of energy is far beyond what an apprentice can use." As he spoke, his gaze fell on the necromancer's staff in Heath's hand. This staff that can activate spells should be an official level wizard tool, right? His gaze became a little greedy, and even Kirst and Marcel could not help but take another look at it. Having an official grade wizard tool could be said to be every apprentice's greatest dream. Heath admitted generously, "Yes." There was nothing to hide. He was confident that he could handle the three of them together. The mana consumed by the release of the Hellfire Sea came from magic stones. He himself played a catalytic role, and the mana in his body was basically not consumed. After a pause, Heath said, "Your staff is not bad as well." John's wizard gear was an emerald green long-handled staff. Although it was not as good as his necromancer's staff, it was not much worse. It was worth hundreds of thousands of magic stones on the market. John still could not bear to look at Heath's necromancer's staff. "It's far worse than yours, sir." After a pause, he suddenly asked, "I wonder if you are willing? I can use my staff and magic stones to exchange with you." Heath shook his head and said, "I'm sorry, I won't consider it for the time being." John was very disappointed. Seeing this, Heath put away the necromancer's staff and quickly ended the topic. He was not afraid, but he did not want something bad to happen. Then, he asked, "Didn't you say that you have the book left by Campbell? I'm very interested in it." John nodded. "That's right. If you want it, you can have it for 3,000 magic stones. No bargaining." It was unsure if Heath's refusal made him unhappy, but his attitude was very firm. 3,000 magic stones for a human's war book. This was definitely not cheap. If it was any other wizard, they would definitely think that only a lunatic would spend money to buy it. After all, to wizards, this was completely useless. Even Heath frowned when he heard the price. Although we don't have any friendship to speak of, we just fought side by side. Do we have to fall out so quickly? Thinking about it in his heart, he did not waste time and nodded. All right. Since he liked it, then he would not consider whether it was expensive or not. After all, he had earned quite a lot of magic stones recently. 3,000 magic stones were nothing to him now. The two sides completed the transaction. At this point, the cooperation this time had come to an end. Marcel was the first to bring it up. Since the spider army has been eliminated, there are no problems left. Why don't we part ways here? Kirst said, whatever. John nodded. I don't have any objections. Heath said, whatever. The Grey Wizards teams were usually temporary. When they encountered difficulties, they would team up and cooperate temporarily. After the difficulties were resolved, they would part ways. It was not bad for them to part ways like Heath and the rest. Many Grey Wizards had internal conflicts during the team formation process due to various reasons. In the end, there were many situations where the team was destroyed. A group without authority and order was just like that. Cooperation did not exist. Then, everyone, it's my pleasure to see you again later. See you again. Half an hour later, at the eastern entrance of the Magic Bug Forest. Marcel stood under an oak tree and looked around sneakily. He then released a few mottled flying insects. The mottled flying insects flapped their wings and flew in all directions. Not long after, they returned to Marcel's hands. He held the mottled flying insects and placed them by his ear as if he was listening to what the mottled flying insects were saying. After a while, he touched his chin and said, "They didn't follow us. Humph, at least they're self-aware." He snorted lightly and immediately headed towards a direction in the forest. And not long after he left. Day. 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 The sound of footsteps could be heard. More than 10 figures appeared in this open space. They were the knights from before. Immediately, their master, John, also walked into the open space. Hiss. As John arrived, there was a sudden hiss from the oak tree beside them. There was actually a chameleon lying on the trunk of the tree. It had almost completely merged with the trunk. At this moment, the lizard jumped onto the back of John's hand. John put the lizard to his ear and exchanged a few words. Is he going that way? I'd like to see what little secret this kid is hiding. Soon, he led his people in the direction that Marcel had just left. Not long after John left. Rustle. A soft rustle sounded, and the bushes shook again. A figure walked out from within. It was Kirst. He looked in the direction where John and Marcel had gone for a moment, and then, like a cloud of smoke, he gave chase. And not long after he left. TSS. There was a faint sound. A figure suddenly appeared on the trunk. It was Heath. What a party! Sighing softly, Heath looked thoughtfully in the direction in which they had gone. Chapter 122, Talk. Standing on the treetop, Heath looked in the direction where they left and pondered for a while. In the end, he stopped the idea of following them. Forget it. I can't even finish my own things. I'd better mind my own business. He came here to improve his strength, not to find out other people's secrets. Moreover, this secret was obvious and might bring trouble. Curiosity killed the cat. A wizard's curiosity should be placed on studying spells. Shaking his head, Heath dispelled the curiosity in his heart and began his hunting trip. He returned to the battlefield first. The demonized spider was only a low-level demonized creature. Its value was very low, and now it was burnt. It was absolutely worthless to ordinary wizards, but to Heath, it was still a treasure that had remaining value he could squeeze out. After looking around the battlefield, he saw that the damage was not that great, so he began to extract it. Beep, extraction successful. Spiritual power plus 0.01. Beep, extraction successful. Obtained talent, spider silk. Beep, extraction successful. Obtained demonized spider's life sequence. He really did not know if he did not extract it. The moment he extracted it, he was shocked. After his talent venom, Heath had even extracted the demonized spider's talent spider silk. It must be known that many spells of wizards originated from the physical simulation of demonized creatures in nature, such as the lightning burst that simulated the moray eel, or the environmental invisibility that simulated the chameleon. These simulations required a huge amount of time and energy for wizards to study and dissect a certain species for many years before the final result could be obtained. And now, he had directly skipped the process of research and obtained the final knowledge. Only a wizard knew how powerful and terrifying this ability was. I've come to the right place to extract 2 spells. With this knowledge, Heath only needed to combine them with runes to easily display the talents of these species through magic. It was basically equivalent to directly extracting 2 spells. And I can even extract life sequence. This is really incredible. Life sequence was equivalent to the genetic code of the species. Mastering these life sequences was equivalent to directly cultivating such species in the laboratory. This is also because I advanced to an advanced apprentice? Then why can't I extract it from ordinary demonized beasts? It should be related to the relatively new gene series of these species, right? Heath guessed that the fact that he could directly extract the life sequence of the species should have a lot to do with the species in the magic bug forest. Most of the species in the magic bug forest were not original, but were new species that Wizard Parker had bred on the basis of other similar species. For example, the queen spider. The original queen spider was smaller than this, and it was even more ferocious and could not be tamed. In order to tame this species, Wizard Parker had specially modified and adjusted its life sequence. Many species here were like this. The magic bug forest was Wizard Parker's magic bug laboratory. What surprises are waiting for me? Looking at the vast forest in the distance, Heath set off on his journey with great ambition. At the same time, in the Shadow Tower, in Wizard Edith's room. Bang! A heavy sound came from the room. Wizard Edith slapped the desk hard and said angrily, "These reckless apprentices, damn it! Really damn it!" At this time, Cassandra walked into the office. She could not help but ask, "What happened? Why are you so angry?" Edith said angrily, "There was a warning from the magic bug forest. Someone broke in." Wizard Parker, the former owner of the magic bug forest, had a good relationship with Edith. Before he went to the secret plane, he asked Edith to take care of the magic bug forest. Now that Wizard Parker was gone, Edith could not even protect his hard work. Naturally, he felt bad. Cassandra glanced at the desk. There was a crystal ball on the desk. The crystal ball displayed the image of the magic bug forest. She shook her head and comforted, "There's no need. These bugs are not worth much. What's really valuable is the gene series left by Parker, and these are things that they cannot be taken away no matter what. Territory, resources, wizard tools, magic stones." Shadow Tower gave everything away, but everything related to knowledge was still hidden. Edith frowned, but still said somewhat indignantly, "I just can't stand seeing these guys recklessly destroy Parker's painstaking efforts." Cassandra smiled and changed the topic, "Which wizard is so free to come to the magic bug forest to take advantage of the magic bug forest instead of fighting for territory? Tell me, let me see." The resources in the magic bug forest were valuable to the apprentices, but they should be worthless to the wizards. Edith said in an astonished tone, "It's a few apprentices." Cassandra was surprised, "What?" She clearly remembered that Parker had reinforced the protection measures in the magic bug forest before he left. Without the strength of an official wizard, it was impossible to break in. Cassandra continued to ask, "Where did the apprentices come from to be so capable?" Edith helplessly revealed a name. "Shadow Tower." Cassandra was stunned, but quickly understood. It was a reasonable answer. After all, other than their Shadow Tower, there weren't many apprentices who could break in anywhere else in the Underdark Tresia. Edith said angrily, "I really didn't expect to raise a bunch of ingrates." Cassandra shook her head. "Forget it. We're just taking what we need. We can't just call ourselves mentors." Edith hesitated for a moment, and his expression gradually eased. He sighed and did not say anything else. Cassandra continued to ask, "Who are the brats that broke in?" Edith said, "There are a total of 4 who broke into the magic bug forest. 2 advanced apprentices and 2 intermediate apprentices. Those 2 advanced apprentices are the 2 grey wizards outside. The remaining 2 intermediate apprentices are from our Shadow Tower." After a pause, he added, "The 2 intermediate apprentices are the ones who really played a key role. Especially the kid who set up the Hellfire Sea. Otherwise, those 2 grey mice wouldn't be able to charge in so easily." Cassandra was even more surprised now. Hellfire Sea? She asked in surprise, are you sure that the intermediate apprentice set up the Hellfire Sea? In the Shadow Tower, Cassandra was definitely one of the wizards who were most familiar with the Hellfire Sea, because she was the one who had created the spell in the first place, and she was also one of the main creators. As the creator of the spell, she certainly knew how powerful the spell was, but at the same time, she also knew how complicated the spell was. The knowledge of runes, arrays, and other things involved in the spell could be described as a vast amount, and there were many obscure and profound parts. Even some wizards only knew a little about it. In Cassandra's view, without decades of hard work on knowledge, it was impossible to complete the arrangement of this spell. Those who had the time to spend decades studying knowledge and still be alive were basically wizards. It was not that there were no apprentices with extraordinary talent who could learn it in one go, but they were definitely formal apprentices. There was no reason for them to sell the tower so easily just for a small profit. Edith smiled bitterly and said, I also think it's strange where an ordinary apprentice learned the Hellfire Sea, but I can't be wrong about the Hellfire Sea. He pulled the crystal ball over and gently tapped it. It's this apprentice. Take a look for yourself. The crystal ball flashed, and soon an apprentice appeared on it. When she saw the iconic black hair, which Cassandra couldn't help but twitch her lips. It's that kid again. Chapter 123, Apprentice. It's that kid again. A surprised and angry voice sounded in the room. Edith was stunned. You know this apprentice? In his impression, Cassandra was a wizard with a good mentality. She would not get angry easily. Cassandra snorted. Sato brought him here 3 years ago. I was the first one to teach him. This kid is quite talented and smart. He advanced to an intermediate apprentice in just 3 years. He is also good at spells. He also contributed to the war between us and the Red Devil's blood. The Hellfire Sea was the reward he was given. Edith's eyes widened. 3 years. To advance to an intermediate apprentice in 3 years and master a spell with the difficulty factor of Hellfire Sea, even their students probably did not have the ability. Cassandra nodded. There's no mistake. Back then, his innate spiritual power was appraised to be 1.6, which left a deep impression on me. Edith said in puzzlement, isn't that too fast? It was not rare to advance to an intermediate level apprentice in 3 years, but that was under the premise of having a large number of resources and backing. It was really inconceivable for these ordinary apprentices to have such conditions. Cassandra said, this little fellow is unrivaled in terms of diligence and hard work. Previously, Debbie let me know in private that he had been hunting and earning resources every day for 3 years. Regardless of whether it was windy or rainy, he had basically never rested. It is not uncommon for him to be at his current level. Edith suddenly came to a realization. In that case, he really is a talent. After pausing for a moment, he frowned and said, then how? Theoretically speaking, such a talent should have been accepted as an official apprentice early on. Cassandra said, I recommended him to Slater, but coincidentally, the apprentices of the Snowway family were also sent over, so Slater didn't choose him. Wizard Edith said, that's a pity. Cassandra shook her head and said, it's okay. This kid is 100 times smarter than the goblins, so he won't die so easily. Let's wait for this storm to pass and talk to him. It won't be so easy to die. Anyway, after this round of fighting, there should be a lot of free resources. Slater is too fond of bloodlines and families. He still can't understand the noble character. Wizard Edith did not continue the conversation. It was hard to say which was more important, hard work or birth. Cassandra said, it's probably because of this. Some time ago, this kid left the tower. Before he left, he took advantage of the time we were recuperating to extort a complete spell from McGee's student. This kid is very greedy. If I hadn't found him in time, I'm afraid that idiot McGee's student would have been wiped clean. Because of this matter, Daniel was still locked in the isolation room. Edith was stunned. As if he suddenly thought of something. He suddenly asked, then why did he suddenly go to the magic bug forest? Could it be that he has other plans? Cassandra was stunned. You mean? Edith said, have you forgotten? Parker left a lot of good things there before he left, including a bottle of wizard's water. Wizard's water was an essential item for an apprentice to advance to a wizard. Cassandra said, it shouldn't be. He's just an ordinary apprentice. Who else knows about Parker's secret room besides us old guys? Edith said, there are also Parker's students, but one of them, Donna, went missing a few days ago. Cassandra frowned. You mean? Edith said, there are precautions against fire-type spells, but these precautions were ineffective just now. The reason is that this kid dismantled them. If they didn't know the exact location of the defensive spells, how could they be dismantled so easily? Cassandra was silent for a moment. She said cautiously, we can't jump to conclusions without conclusive evidence. This was not Cassandra intentionally favoring Heath, but a judgment made purely from an objective point of view. Before making the recommendation to Heath, she had investigated his background in detail. Although he was greedy, the situation of breaking the rules did not happen. Even in the secular world, wizards rarely followed the spell control regulations. He had strictly followed them, going to great lengths for a soul gem. If not for that, she would not have recommended an apprentice who had only entered the tower for 3 years to Slater. Edith said, let's hope it has nothing to do with them. Otherwise, if they really go for the treasure vault, they will only suffer the consequences of their own actions. The thing Parker left in front of the treasure vault is not something an apprentice can deal with. At this point, he furrowed his brows tightly. It was fine for these apprentices to seek their own death. However, releasing the thing inside would inevitably lead to another big trouble. It would undoubtedly make things worse for the already chaotic Underdark Tresia. He sighed and said, it would be great if Slater were here at this time. If it were him, it would be very easy to determine the truth. Slater had always been in charge of enforcing the law. Cassandra asked, has Slater not contacted us yet? Not long after surrendering, they tried to contact Slater, who had run out, to summon him back. Edith said, the last time we received news was in Castle City in the south. Cassandra asked, what did he say? Edith said, what else can he say? It's not like you don't know his temper. After suffering such a great humiliation, he even destroyed the life-saving stone tablet. At this time, even if we chase him to the Dark Witch region, he won't let Carlos go. How could he come back? According to the agreement made during the surrender, the Shadow Tower was not allowed to step out of the Shadowland for 100 years as the price to protect the Shadow Tower from being targeted. Slater left the Shadow Tower before the treaty was signed. According to the rules, he was not bound by the treaty. However, if he returned to the Shadow Tower, he had to stay here and not go out. Cassandra said worriedly, he's too irrational. Edith said, don't worry too much. We all know about Slater's strength. There are only a few wizards in the Underdark Tresia who can make an enemy out of him. Those who can keep him don't exist. It's impossible for Carlos to take out a second 3-ring scroll, right? The anxiety on Cassandra's face did not diminish in the slightest. She shook her head and said with a serious expression, you don't know the strength of destiny-type spells. Once this spell is dragged onto the chessboard of the battle, there will definitely be an opponent who is equal to him. Even if there isn't one now, it will definitely appear in a short period of time, no matter how incredible the way it appears, and this opponent will definitely fight with him. Wizard Edith was stunned. He was very clear about Slater's strength. Regardless of how strong his physical strength was. In terms of combat skills, he was one of the top existences in Shadow Tower and even the entire Underdark Tresia. Unless they completely crushed him in terms of physical strength, if they wanted to win and keep him alive. Moreover, from what Cassandra said, it was very likely that this person had the strength to fight with Slater in a short period of time. Was it really possible for such a person to exist? To complete a qualitative leap in strength in a short period of time, was there really such a person in the world? Magic Bug Forest. Beep, extraction successful. Spiritual power plus 0.01. A clear notification sounded. Heath wiped the sweat from his brow and threw the basketball-sized red-spotted beetle into his dimensional pocket. He looked down at his attribute list and could not help but feel a sense of joy. This trip really came to the right place. If he could continue at this pace, it would not be long before he advanced to a wizard. Chapter 124, Guarding the Forest. I really came to the right place for this trip. Heath was overjoyed. The harvest in the Magic Bug Forest had exceeded his expectations, mainly because there were too many new species here. The bloodthirsty giant mosquito the size of a basketball, the human-faced hard bug with a human face on its back, the mutated bug-tailed banshee, the baby worm that would cry like a child. There were countless species. These species were all new species that Wizard Parker had created by modifying the life sequences based on the original species. Basically, every species could be extracted in Heath's hands. Extracted attributes, extracted life sequence, and even extracted talent. Strength, spells, and knowledge. Triple development. And these three were the most important training items for wizards. They were difficult problems that could not be avoided in the path of wizards. Strength determined the foundation. Only with sufficient strength could one learn the corresponding spells. The foundation of spells came from knowledge. Only with sufficient knowledge could one stack up powerful spells. No matter how gifted a wizard was, they could only work hard and expend their energy. But when it came to Heath, they were indeed advancing at the same time. The three items were advancing together. It had to be said that this method of cheating was too shameless. This is exactly why I should work harder. This is worthy of the fortune bestowed by God. Clenching his fist, Heath reminded himself silently. Then, he quickly restrained the joy in his heart and returned to a calm state of mind as he walked forward. Towards the lush forest, towards the promising future. And also towards a wizard. On the other side, in the depths of the magic bug forest. In the depths of the magic bug forest stood a wizard tower. It was about 10 meters tall, and its appearance was similar to an ordinary wizard tower. It had grayish-black stone walls, towering columns, mottled nettles, spiral stone steps, small stone windows, and so on. This was the guarding tower that the wizards had left here. It was originally used for the guarding apprentices to live, train, experiment, and lock up prisoners. With the departure of the Shadow Tower, the Forest Guard Tower was naturally abandoned. Now, only a few prisoners and green goblins responsible for maintaining the operation of the tower remained here. At this moment, in front of the Forest Guard Tower. Day. 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 A series of footsteps sounded. The treetops in front of the tower shook, and a young apprentice walked out of the forest. It was one of the apprentices who had fought alongside Heath, Marcel. On the green lawn, the green goblins were doing their daily work. When they saw Marcel walking over, they immediately became alert. A green goblin raised his hands and cast a spell. His long and thin fingers aimed at Marcel. This is the Forest Guard Tower of the Magic Bug Forest. Unfamiliar wizards, please stop. Give me your secret order, or else please leave this place. Leave this place. Although green goblins were useful, they were expensive to raise. The Shadow Tower could not use so many green goblins after putting down the scepter. Therefore, most of the green goblins that were left outside received the mission to guard the place. With only low-level intelligence, they naturally would not think too much. They just diligently carried out the orders left behind by the wizards. Day. Marcel stopped in his tracks. He took out a glass bottle from the package. To one's surprise, there was a translucent little person inside the bottle. Anyone who was familiar with spells could recognize the situation at a glance, the soul in the bottle. The bottle contained a female apprentice. It was the missing official apprentice of the Shadow Tower, Donna. It was also the one that Marcel had clung onto when he was in the Shadow Tower, and Donna was also one of the guardians of the Magic Bug Forest and a student of Wizard Parker. Taking out the small bottle, Marcel shook it gently. Hey, wake up! Don't sleep! Donna was woken up in the bottle. When she saw Marcel outside, her eyes were burning with flames. You despicable and shameless person! The wizards will not let you go. You will become a dark wizard and live in pursuit forever. Marcel smiled as if nothing had happened. The Shadow Tower can no longer protect itself. Now, the entire Underdark Treesia can no longer take care of itself. Moreover, compared to the resources in the treasury, the title of a mere dark wizard is nothing. Donna's face turned red and she said in anger, "How could I have believed you, you scum?" Marcel laughed loudly. Ha ha ha, if you want to blame someone, blame yourself for your own debauchery. You didn't even notice that I put anti-magic potions into the lust potion. You are even more horny than a common. As he spoke, a sickly expression appeared on Marcel's face. The feeling of killing someone when they were having an orgasm was truly extraordinary. Marcel had even decided that after this was over, he would definitely find a few more women to experience it again. Donna was so angry that she couldn't speak. You. Marcel wiped away the smile on his face. All right, cut the crap. Quickly tell me the secret order. Donna said coldly, in your dreams. Marcel knew that she was very stubborn, so he didn't continue to talk nonsense. Instead, he opened the bottle cap and stuffed a strange blue flower into it. The moment the bottle cap was opened, Donna tried to escape, but she was blocked by the seal at the bottle mouth. Marcel said, "For the sake of the past, I'll give you one last chance. If you cooperate obediently, I promise to let you out after the matter is done." Donna sneered. "The Amina family will not let you off." Marcel said angrily, "You asked for it." As he spoke, he immediately drew a rune on the glass bottle. The blue grass in the bottle suddenly burst into flames with a bang. The blue flame instantly engulfed Donna in the bottle. As if she had encountered some kind of extreme pain, Donna immediately let out a miserable scream. Soul-devouring flame flower! Soul-devouring flame flower! No! The flame soon dissipated. Donna was still standing in the bottle. There was no change in her appearance, but her eyes had become dull and stupefied. Soul-devouring flame flower, a soul-type material in the wizard world. When combined with a specific spirit-type spell, it could burn the spiritual part of the soul and retain the pure soul origin. Marcel continued to ask, "What's the secret order?" This time, Donna did not hesitate and answered truthfully. "The secret order is..." With the secret order that he had just received, Marcel successfully made the green goblins, who were only following orders, step aside. He raised his head to look at the unobstructed tower, his expression excited and elated. In the years he had been with Donna, he had found out about her G-spot and also uncovered many secrets, including the one related to the Forest Guard Tower, which was a treasure trove that even wizards would be tempted to look at. Buzz! 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 At this moment, the sound of wings flapping could be heard. Then, a striped bug flew over from afar and landed on Marcel's shoulder. Both sides seemed to be communicating. The smile on Marcel's face immediately froze. "These greedy little people!" He cursed in a low voice and walked into the tower. At the same time, he ordered the green goblins around him, "Whoever comes after me, kill them." At some point, a dark cloud suddenly gathered at the top of the tower. It seemed that a storm was coming. A few days later, in Magic Bug Forest, the dark cloud that had been overcast for a few days finally fell with a loud rumble this morning. The rain was very rapid, and in just one morning, it turned into a rainstorm. Somewhere in Magic Bug Forest. Clang! Clang! The sound of metal interweaving with the sound of splashing rain could be heard. In the pouring rain, Heath was fighting with a monster. It was a demonized giant ant. It was about 5 meters long and more than 2 meters tall when it stood up. Its pincer-like sharp mouth could spit acid that could easily corrode steel. Its strength was as high as over 30 points. The battle continued for several minutes. Heath took the opportunity to jump on the demonized giant ant's head. He stabbed the crossguard sword into the demonized giant ant's head. The yellowish-brown blood mixed with the red and white brain fluid sprayed onto Heath's face. The demonized giant ant's huge body finally fell to the ground with a rumble, splashing a large amount of mud. Phew! Heath let out a sigh of relief. He then used the back of his hand to roughly wipe the bloodstains on his face. He jumped off the demonized giant ant's back and did his routine, extraction. Beep, extraction successful. Spiritual power plus 0.01. Beep, extraction successful. Obtained talent, acid. Beep, extraction successful. Obtained demonized giant ant's life sequence. Finally, 2 long tentacles of the demonized giant ant were cut off, and the hunt was considered to have ended successfully. Leaving the corpse on the ground, Heath looked around, hesitating whether he should continue the hunt. The rain was too heavy. Heath himself hated the rain. Being wet in the rain would make him very impatient, which would affect his combat ability. Forget it. I'm not in a hurry. I'll find a cave to shelter from the rain first. After thinking for a moment, he made a decision quickly. I wonder if there's a cave ahead. With this thought, he walked forward quickly. In such weather, it was better to build a fire in the cave, burn some meat, drink some wine, and hunt something later. After walking forward for a few minutes, Heath suddenly stopped. He frowned. Is there a smell of blood? It was not surprising that there was a smell of blood in this forest full of fierce beasts, but this smell of blood was very unique. It belonged to humans. At present, who else could there be in this forest beside them? Is it Marcel and the others? Thinking in puzzlement, Heath walked forward. After walking for more than 10 steps, he found a corpse beside a bush. It was the corpse of a knight, one of John's followers. The time of death should have been more than 2 days. This was what Heath had determined from the dark color of the knight's skin. The magic bug forest belonged to the land of elements. Ordinary humans could not stay in it for long. Marcel regularly gave them magic potions to fight against elements. If they were interrupted for more than 24 hours, their bodies would begin to react to the elements. Whoosh! At this moment, there was a whoosh. A strange insect suddenly jumped out from the bushes next to them. It was a giant insect that was about 3 meters long and looked like a giant fly. At the same time, there was a long, thin needle on its fat butt. Mylot wasp. Heath recognized the identity of this monster at a glance. It was a kind of demonized creature that Parker had bred with the demonized giant fly and the demonized giant wasp combined with the demon bloodline. It had the strength of a high-level demonized beast. Squeak! At the same time, the strange insect let out a strange cry. At the same time, it raised its butt high up, and a long and thin wasp needle instantly shot out from the catheter. Like an arrow, it let out a sharp whistle in the air and shot straight towards Heath. Chapter 125, Secret. The stinger was as fast as lightning and appeared in front of Heath in an instant. However, at the same time, a silver-white liquid metal quietly emerged like a curtain. The stinger that flew towards it made a bang sound when it hit it and was sent flying. Then, clang! A cold metallic sound exploded. The cross blade was suddenly unsheathed and streaked across the air with a cold light. Like a rising crescent moon, it pounced towards the Mylot wasp. However, with a poof sound, the Mylot wasp's head and half of its wings were cut off. The insect that had lost its center of gravity fell into the mud with a plop sound. Its large body, which was not completely dead yet, was still hovering on the ground, stirring up a large amount of mud. Heath was about to attack again, but at this moment, buzz! 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 The sound of dense flapping of wings could be heard. 5 or 6 Mylot wasps suddenly flew out, and their high tails shot out a few needles towards Heath. For a time, only the sound of shoo 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 could be heard. Heath frowned. While he used his mimicry shield to block the incoming attack, he charged into the swarm of insects. He waved the cross sword in his hand repeatedly, cutting down these monsters. Before he could breathe a sigh of relief, suddenly, buzz! 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 An even more intense buzzing sound exploded. Hundreds of Mylot wasps suddenly flew out in front of him. Other than that, there were also demonized giant ants, giant spiders, and Pandora's blood mosquitoes. There were hundreds and thousands of them. Heath's hair stood on end. Seeing that, he didn't dare to be careless anymore. He hurriedly threw away the corpse on the ground and left. More than 10 minutes later. Buzz! 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 In the forest, more than 10 Mylot wasps circled around the forest like patrolling guards. Soon, as if they didn't find anything, the Mylot wasps quickly flew away. Not long after the Mylot wasps flew away, a figure suddenly appeared in the forest. Did they poke the nest over there? Why do the bugs suddenly seem to have gone crazy? Looking at the Mylot wasps that had gone far away, Heath was puzzled. For some reason, not only did the bugs in this area suddenly increase in number, but they also became very aggressive. What was even stranger was that they even became in groups, as if something was controlling them. Over there, is that the forest guard tower? Did something happen to the forest guard tower? The area where the bugs had mutated happened to be in the forest guard tower. Heath felt that this was definitely not a coincidence. Forget it, let's find someone to ask. With this thought in mind, he entered stealth mode again and continued to sneak back to the corpse of the knight he had found before. He picked up the corpse and walked out. He walked out for nearly 1,000 meters. This was what he had repeatedly tried to discover when he was entangled with the bugs. The active areas of these bugs were mainly concentrated within 1,000 meters of the forest guard tower. The forest would return to normal once it was beyond this area. He carried the corpse to a nearby cave. He then took out runic pens, beast blood, white candles, and other items from his space pocket and set up a magic array on the ground. After 2 years of hard training, Heath's dark magic had also improved significantly. Not long after, a soul summoning array was set up. With the chanting of an obscure spell, the soul that had yet to dissipate from the corpse was dragged out by him. The incomplete soul made the man look silly, but it was more than enough to answer the question. Heath asked, "What happened? Why were you there? Where is your master?" As he spoke, Heath raised a white candle to the man's eyes. The man's eyes focused on the candle light. He opened his mouth and said intermittently, encountered an attack monster. Under the flickering candlelight, the man slowly described the whole story. As he listened to the man's description, Heath's expression changed rapidly. At first, he was puzzled, then surprised, and then he frowned, until it slowly turned into excitement and anticipation. Shadow Tower, Canteen. In front of the dining table, Ender and a few other apprentices were gathering together. They were eating the food on the table and talking about all kinds of messy things. Ender said, "I don't know how that guy Heath is doing. I heard that there is a war going on everywhere. It is crazy for him to go out alone. I don't understand. Is it not good to stay here?" Jessica flipped her hair and said, "What's good about it? Even the meditation water is out of stock. Although it was hard in the past, there was no need to worry about cultivation resources. But now, there is nothing. If this goes on, I'm afraid that cultivation will become a problem." Everyone frowned, shook their heads, and sighed. An apprentice asked, "Have you guys considered going out? I heard that although it's very chaotic outside now, there are opportunities everywhere." Everyone at the dining table fell silent. Ender first shook his head and said, "Forget it. No matter how many resources we have to be alive to spend them. Right now, there are people dying everywhere outside. With our little ability, what can we get if we go out? Most likely, we're just delivering food to others." An apprentice echoed, "If only I had the strength like Heath. I would have gone out to fight long ago." Ender said, "I can't compare to him. He is a madman." Jessica sighed softly and said, "Yet. With his hard work, how can he not be strong? He rises early, greets the dark, and is not afraid of the wind and rain. Sometimes, I even suspect that this guy won't be tired." Jenny said, "That's why he was able to advance to an intermediate apprentice in just 3 years." The apprentices also agreed one after another. "Tisk tisk, based on his progress, I'm afraid that in another 3 years, he might advance to an advanced apprentice. It won't be that fast. It'll take at least 5 years. That's still very impressive, okay? How many people can advance to an advanced apprentice in 10 years? Ender frowned and said a little unhappily, "All right, whether he can advance or not, he has to survive first. Have you forgotten what's happening outside? With his greedy personality, sooner or later, he'll get into trouble. What if he meets some powerful madman?" He snorted lightly and said, "I see that when the time comes, he won't be able to get any resources, and instead, he'll lose his life." On the other side, in Magic Bug Forest, in the cave. From a certain point of view, Ender's judgment of Heath was indeed quite accurate. When faced with benefits, he would always sacrifice himself. No matter how great the danger he faced, as long as it gave enough benefits, it would always be able to drive him forward. As long as it did not involve his own moral bottom line, he was willing to rack his brains and work hard for it. It was the same in his work in the past, it was the same now as he became an apprentice wizard, and it would not change in the future. In his view, in this world, no matter what the situation was, he should strive forward and strive to pursue everything he wanted. Only then would his life be meaningful. He preferred writing his own epic to listening to other people's legends. And it was the same at this moment. After listening to the Night Soul's description of the incident, Heath's eyes were completely replaced by excitement and anticipation. His mind was completely captivated by the item that the knight mentioned. What the knight mentioned was wizard's water. "There's wizard's water here.